Solo Leveling Season 3 is finally here, and this time it's not just 1 or 2 episodes. We've got the entire Season 3. Yes, you heard that right. While we've uploaded episodes separately before, this time we're bringing you the full Season 3, starting right where Season 2 left off. So, without wasting any more time, let's dive straight into it. Jin Woo advanced toward his next target. The hunt pressed on, and he was prepared for any opposition. Emerging from the depths of the gate, the boss of the dungeon stood tall, flanked by his elite guards, his aura radiating power and dominance. Surveying the destruction, he searched for the one responsible for the massacre of his kin. His voice, both impressed and furious, echoed through the battlefield. The boss took note of how this lone intruder had managed to push this far, annihilating his forces while even speaking their language. However, his confidence swiftly turned to unease when he called upon his soldiers, expecting them to encircle the enemy. He roared for them to appear, yet there was no reply. The eerie silence sent a chill through the air. What the boss failed to realize was that Jin Woo's shadow soldiers had already eradicated his army, eliminating them before they could regroup. Jin Woo found the moment amusing. Small? Now that's ironic. He mused while signaling his shadow soldiers to reveal themselves. One by one, the remaining magic beasts collapsed. Ambushed by the lurking shadow soldiers, they fell swiftly, dispatched with precision and ease as though cutting through paper. Jin Woo surveyed the war-torn battlefield, confirming that no opposition remained. The magic beast boss stood frozen, unable to process the overwhelming carnage before him. Terror crept in as he grasped the grim reality. His forces had been completely wiped out. Desperate, he raised his palm and summoned his hidden soldiers from within the trees. The massive trunks splintered as more magic beasts emerged from their concealment. Yet before they could take even a single step, Beru, one of Jin Woo's strongest shadow warriors, struck with deadly precision, severing their heads with a single move. Jin Woo, flanked by his powerful shadow army, advanced with an imposing presence that was impossible to ignore. The boss, paralyzed by sheer dread, struggled to form words. Realizing he was hopelessly outmatched, he barely had time to react before Jin Woo issued his next command. This time, leading the charge was Beru, the formidable ant-like shadow warrior. Sensing imminent peril, the remaining magic beasts surged forward in desperation, yet they were utterly outclassed by Jin Woo's forces. The battlefield turned into a scene of devastation as the shadow soldiers tore through their enemies without restraint. Two centaur-like beasts, towering and more fearsome than the others, lunged at Jin Woo, their weapons poised to strike. However, before they could reach him, Tank, one of Jin Woo's most formidable shadow beasts, intervened. With monstrous strength, Tank shredded the centaurs apart, adding to the havoc unfolding around them. The boss of the magic beasts, witnessing his army's complete annihilation, howled in agony, crying out for his fallen brethren. But his pleas were met with silence as Beru surged forward at lightning speed, claws flashing. In an instant, Beru's talons pierced the boss, while Igris severed his arm clean off. The boss collapsed with a sickening thud, thick fluid gushing from his wounds as he wailed in agony. Tusk activated his ability, Hymn of Giants, increasing his size dramatically. Then, utilizing his skill, Inverse Gravity, Tusk slammed the already battered boss into the ground with earth-shaking force. The battlefield trembled from the impact, leaving the boss broken and defeated. As the dust settled, Jin Woo strode forward, his presence cold and commanding. Standing over the barely breathing magic beast, he fixed him with an icy gaze and demanded answers. Jin Woo made it clear that the beast's suffering would be lessened if he cooperated, yet the boss remained silent, blood still dripping from his mouth. Jin Woo sighed, realizing that the system might be interfering once again, preventing the beast from speaking. Nothing to say, Jin Woo thought to himself. It must be the system blocking you, but I'll uncover the truth sooner or later. Reaching into his inventory, Jin Woo retrieved a key, a peculiar item obtained from the cursed random box after his victory over the demon monarch, King Busan, in the demon castle. At the time, the key had offered no information, leaving Jin Woo puzzled about its purpose. Reflecting on his past achievements, he recalled reaching level 100 during the Jeju Island raid, an event that had finally unlocked crucial details about the key. The system had at last provided an explanation. The required conditions had been met. The key unlocks the entrance to the Katanen temple. It can be used at the designated gate. The location of the designated gate will be revealed after the allotted time passes. The name flashed in Jinwoo's mind. Katanen Temple. A sense of familiarity washed over him as he quickly pieced together his memories. The double dungeon, the ancient temple at its core, the stone statues, and the stone slate held by one of them. It all resurfaced in his mind. The puzzle pieces were aligning. Jinwoo realized that the system was leading him back to where everything had started. The dungeon, where he had first encountered the terrifying stone statues, the very place that had set him on his path as a hunter, was now calling him once more. But this time, it felt different. If everything had been orchestrated from the beginning, if the system had been anticipating his return, then Jinwoo knew he had no choice but to respond. His eyes burned with determination. The system had thrown another challenge his way, and he was prepared to meet it head-on. "If that's the path, then wait for me," Jinwoo murmured. With unwavering resolve, he declared, "I will be coming soon." Meanwhile, Jin-ho's eyes narrowed as he focused intently on the computer screen, his sharp gaze filled with determination. Like a hawk tracking its prey, he scanned through posts and comments, his mission clear, to protect Jinwoo's reputation at all costs. Swiftly, he captured screenshots of any offensive content and began reporting them. The rhythmic clacking of his keyboard filled the room until he finally paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. Just then, Jinwoo appeared beside him, his silent approach startling Jin-ho out of his concentration. Without warning, Jinwoo asked if everything was all right, making Jin-ho jump from his seat in surprise. He quickly turned around, recognizing his boss standing there, still clad in his hunting gear. Jinwoo inquired if there had been any trouble, but Jin-ho reassured him that everything was fine. Instead, he asked why Jinwoo was dressed that way, to which Jinwoo casually responded that he had just come out of a gate. Explaining further, Jinwoo mentioned that they needed money for the guild, so he had brought back some high-level magic cores. Jin-ho was impressed, realizing that Jinwoo had just cleared a high-ranked gate, securing their financial stability. This meant they wouldn't have to worry about paying salaries for future employees. When Jinwoo mentioned employees, Jin-ho seemed momentarily puzzled, reminding him that they still needed one more member to officially establish the guild. Then, shifting the conversation, Jin-ho brought up another pressing issue, the name of their guild. At first, Jinwoo didn't think it was a particularly serious matter, but Jin-ho stressed its importance. He enthusiastically suggested various names, such as Seungyu Guild, a fusion of their last names, or Wooho Guild, using the last syllables of their names. He even proposed Jinjin Guild, derived from their middle characters. However, Jinwoo casually suggested Solo Play Guild, a name that reflected his solitary playstyle. For a moment, Jin-ho was taken aback, wondering if Jinwoo was joking. Despite his admiration for Jinwoo, Jin-ho couldn't help but think that perhaps humor was one area where his boss wasn't quite as skilled. It was a reminder that even someone as extraordinary as Jinwoo was still human. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jin-ho paused, curious about who could be visiting. As he creaked open the door, a voice drifted in, asking if this was Hunter Sung Jin-woo's guild office. Jin-ho confirmed it, but was taken aback when the visitor stepped inside. It was Hunter Cha Hae-in. Jin Woo was equally surprised to see her, unable to fathom why someone like her would be at his office. When he asked, Hae-in simply stated that she wanted to join his guild. Jinwoo was confused and sought clarification, unsure of what was happening. He wondered if the president of the Hunters Association had sent her, or if she had been expelled from her previous guild, but Hae-in denied both. Jinwoo then asked why she would want to join his guild, Solo Play. Hae-in seemed rattled, not expecting that to be the name of the guild. Jinwoo saw no issue with the name, explaining that both he and Jin-ho had agreed on it. Jin-ho quickly corrected him, insisting that no such decision had been made, but Jinwoo assumed they had reached a consensus. As the situation grew more perplexing, Jin Woo tried to clear his thoughts, realizing his judgment was clouded. He carefully observed Hae-in, her pulse, breathing, and expression. Although she tried to remain calm, Jin Woo sensed she was hiding something. He wondered why she was so eager to join his guild. Jin Woo brought up the fact that it had been 2 years since Hae-in had awakened and assumed she was still under contract with her current guild. Hae-in surprised him by saying she was willing to pay the penalty to break her contract, even without expecting any compensation from Jin Woo's guild. Perplexed, Jin Woo pressed further, asking why she wanted to join a guild that had little to offer her. Hae-in hesitated, bowing her head without answering. She couldn't bring herself to explain that, from the first time they met, she had been drawn to him, especially to his scent. She also recalled the overwhelming emotions she experienced during the battle on Jeju Island, where she had been certain she would die. But when she woke up in the helicopter, unable to believe she was still alive, the first name that came to her mind was Jin Woo. The president had confirmed it too. Jin Woo's presence had brought her comfort in the face of death. Embarrassed, Hae-in found it difficult to admit that she wanted Jin Woo by her side in such moments, as it was something deeply personal. Jin Woo, meanwhile, reflected on how differently Hae-in had behaved at the funeral, sensing that she had been planning this for a while. Finally, Hae-in gave a simple, prepared response, meeting Jin Woo's eyes. She said she wanted a simpler life, as if trying to downplay the true reasons behind her decision. Jin Woo considered the situation carefully as he listened to Jin Ho's thoughts. Jin Ho reminded him of how much pressure Hunter Cha Hae-in must have faced from the Hunters Guild to stay with them, especially given her young age, only around 22 or 23. Jin Woo understood the burden of being an S-rank hunter and the struggles the Hunters Guild had endured during the Jeju Island raid. He empathized with Hae-in's situation, but he also needed to be cautious. To test her resolve, Jin Woo decided to introduce an entrance test for his guild. Hae-in was surprised, as this wasn't mentioned in the recruitment notice, but Jin Woo smoothly explained that it was a rule, perhaps an oversight on Jin Ho's part. He then sent Jin Ho to fetch some drinks and snacks, giving them some time to prepare. As soon as Hae-in heard the word test, she grew serious, her expression becoming more determined. Jin Woo was a bit caught off guard, unsure if she was being serious or just stubborn. However, the look in her eyes showed a hidden passion and determination. Jin Woo informed her that the test would involve facing one of his summons, specifically his strongest one. Hae-in didn't back down, showing no fear or hesitation. She was prepared for the challenge and eager to begin immediately. Jin Woo suggested they head to the gymnasium of the association to conduct the test. Both of them stood up as if they had planned this moment in advance. As they got ready to leave, Jin Woo realized that the gymnasium was quite far from their current location. This was the perfect opportunity to test whether his shadow exchange skill could transport both of them at the same time. Jin Woo reassured Hae-in that they didn't need to take the usual route. Instead, they could take a shortcut by staying close together for a brief moment. Hae-in felt a lump in her throat as Jin Woo moved closer, his face nearer than she had anticipated. With a calm expression, Jin Woo activated the shadow exchange skill, and in an instant, both of them vanished into their shadows. Just as they disappeared, Jin Ho returned to the room with tea and snacks, only to be greeted by an embarrassed-looking high-orc shadow soldier in their place. The orc, unfazed by Jin Ho's confusion, quickly snatched the snacks and began eating them. Meanwhile, as Jin Woo and Hae-in traveled through the shadows, Jin Woo confirmed his theory about the true nature of the shadow exchange skill. It functioned like a gate, allowing them to pass through together. The entry point was their shadow on the ground, while the destination was determined by the location of one of Jin Woo's shadow soldiers. This ability was extraordinary, enabling him to travel vast distances in an instant, with only a 3-hour cooldown before it could be used again. As they arrived at the gymnasium, the automatic lights flickered on, reacting to their mana. The gym was brightly illuminated, and Hae-in was astonished by the skill she had just experienced. She took a moment to take in her surroundings before her gaze landed on Jin Woo, who was already prepared to begin the test. Jin Woo was ready to start, but Hae-in suddenly remembered that she had left her weapon behind. When Jin Woo playfully teased her about the pickaxe, she flushed with embarrassment, recalling that particular incident. He chuckled, reassuring her that he was only joking. Deciding to borrow a weapon from storage, Hae-in walked over to the equipment room, using her hunter's license to access the key card reader. Jin Woo mentioned that hunters were allowed to use the reserve weapons stored in gymnasiums. However, these weapons were not of the highest quality and were primarily for practice. After inspecting the available weapons, Hae-in selected a sword similar in length to the one she was accustomed to using. Once she confirmed her choice, Jin Woo expressed concern that she might not be comfortable with a weapon that wasn't her own. Hae-in dismissed the concern, remarking that in real battles, monsters never allowed hunters to fight under ideal conditions. Jin Woo agreed, acknowledging that an ordinary soldier would stand no chance in such situations. He then summoned a smaller shadow from his own, which moved a few steps away before materializing into a knight. It was Igris, the finest swordsman among Jin Woo's shadow soldiers. Jin Woo proceeded to explain the conditions of the test. Victory would be determined by Hae-in's ability to defeat the summon, while defeat would occur if she chose to surrender. Initially, Jin Woo considered summoning Beru, but he knew that Beru's overwhelming strength could make the fight unnecessarily difficult, even traumatic. Instead, he settled on Igris as the perfect opponent for this test. Hae-in nodded, gripping her borrowed sword and preparing for battle. However, Jin Woo paused, recalling her earlier statement about weapons not being an issue. With a small smirk, he asked her to turn around for a moment. When she complied, Jin Woo reached into his inventory and retrieved the demon monarch's sword. He then handed the powerful weapon to Igris. With everything in place, Jin Woo gave the signal for the battle to commence. As Hae-in turned back, her eyes widened slightly as she noticed Igris now wielding a crackling blue sword, a weapon he hadn't been holding earlier. Without any hesitation, Igris made the first move, swinging the demon monarch's sword with lethal precision. A bolt of lightning surged forward, heading straight for Hae-in. Reacting instantly, she bent backward in a swift, fluid motion, narrowly dodging the attack with cat-like agility. The lightning bolt struck the wall behind her, leaving behind a scorched black mark as proof of its power. Jin Woo observed her movements closely, impressed by her reaction speed. He knew that an ordinary hunter would have been gravely injured, perhaps even killed, if they had been struck by that attack. Hae-in steadied her grip on the sword and dashed forward, her focus unshaken. Igris, determined to follow Jin Woo's instructions, met Hae-in head-on. Their blades clashed with a fierce impact, sending bright sparks scattering across the gym floor. Meanwhile, President Go Gun-hee sat in his office on the highest floor of the main Hunters Association building. His expansive view overlooked the association's premises and the city beyond. As he read through confidential reports, something outside his window caught his eye. The lights were on in the gymnasium, which was supposed to be empty. Curious, Gun-hee buzzed his secretary, asking if anyone had reserved the gym. When informed that there was no scheduled usage, he requested access to the security camera feed. His screen flickered to life, revealing an unexpected sight. Jin Woo and Cha Hae-in locked in an intense sparring session. Gun-hee's initial surprise melted into amusement as he watched the two hunters. A knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He recalled how, after regaining consciousness in the helicopter following the Jeju Island raid, Hae-in's first words had been about Jin Woo. The memory deepened his amusement. Opting to respect their privacy, he instructed his secretary to mark the gym's surveillance as undergoing maintenance and turned off the monitor. Still smiling, Gun-hee returned to his paperwork. A moment later, a tremor from the gym subtly rattled his office walls, yet he didn't even glance up. Instead, his grin remained, filled with quiet amusement. The energy of youth was something truly remarkable. Back in the gym, Jin Woo realized he may have underestimated Hae-in's strength. Despite Igris wielding the powerful demon monarch's sword, Hae-in's relentless offense overwhelmed the knight, sending him crashing into the wall. Seeing this, Jin Woo decided to end the match. However, Hae-in wasn't satisfied. She questioned whether Igris was truly the strongest summon Jin Woo had and demanded to face his absolute best. Jin Woo hesitated, concerned for her safety, but her unwavering resolve convinced him otherwise. Finally, he relented and summoned Beru, the formidable shadow ant exuding an overwhelming aura of intimidation. Unlike other shadow soldiers, whose strength diminished compared to their living forms, Beru was different. He had been bred for one purpose: hunting and killing hunters. That alone made him a terrifying opponent. She froze in place, unable to react, fear gripping her as she closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Just as Beru's claws were about to reach her, Jin Woo intervened. He barely made it in time, catching Beru's claws with his bare hands, preventing the attack. Beru trembled as his eyes met Jin Woo's, and understanding his mistake, Beru leaped back, dropping to the ground and begging for forgiveness. Jin Woo knew why Beru had acted this way. The soldier's instincts to protect his master had been strong enough to override Jin Woo's command. For a moment, Jin Woo glared at Beru before looking to the side where Hae-in had fallen to the ground. Exhausted from the intense battle, Jin Woo, concerned by Hae-in's determination, questioned her motives. He couldn't understand why she was pushing herself so hard. The test they were undergoing was just an entrance exam for a nameless guild. A hunter of Hae-in's caliber didn't need to risk her life over something like this. It simply wasn't worth it. Jin Woo asked her why she was going to such lengths, hoping for an answer that made sense, but Hae-in didn't respond. Her silence only deepened Jin Woo's confusion. He asked again, wondering if there was something more to her actions. Could it be that she was interested in him? The thought seemed outlandish, but it was the only explanation that came to mind. Hae-in seemed taken aback, almost as if the question had jolted her out of her daze. Jin Woo, sensing her surprise, shrugged it off. Perhaps he had been wrong, and there was another reason for her determination. However, after a brief pause, Hae-in collected her thoughts and quietly admitted that Jin Woo was right. She did have feelings for him. Her simple admission surprised Jin Woo, adding a new layer of understanding to the situation. At the Federal Bureau of Hunters in the United States, the atmosphere in the Hunter Command Center was tense. Director David Brennan wasn't pleased with the recent news. His men had failed to recruit Sung Jin Woo, a powerful hunter they had been keen on bringing into their fold. The assistant director entered the office accompanied by Norma Selner, a specialist with unique abilities. David Brennan, eager to get to the bottom of the situation, immediately asked for an explanation. He wasn't interested in apologies. He needed to know what had happened. Michael explained that according to Norma Selner's observations, Sung Jin Woo was not just an ordinary hunter, he was one of the kings. This revelation shocked the director. He asked if this meant that Sung Jin Woo was as powerful as a national-level hunter, someone with immense strength and influence. Norma Selner began to elaborate. She explained that all awakened hunters draw their powers from a place known as the other side. The connection between a hunter and this other side is what she could sense. Sometimes the force from the other side was so strong that some hunters appeared to her as streaks of blinding light, which she referred to as kings. However, in Sung Jin Woo's case, things were different. Norma shivered as she recalled her experience. When she looked into Jin Woo's eyes, she didn't see a connection to the other side. Instead, she saw darkness, an overwhelming, all-consuming darkness. Sung Jin Woo didn't borrow his strength from somewhere else. He was the source of his own power. There were no limitations, no connections to channel his abilities. He was the darkness itself, a force beyond anything she had encountered before. The director, deep in thought, asked if this meant Sung Jin Woo was an evil person. Norma clarified that she wasn't speaking about good or evil, but rather the nature of his power. Jin Woo didn't rely on an external connection for his strength, which meant that the usual limitations didn't apply to him. As the weight of Norma's words settled in, the assistant director, Michael, couldn't help but shiver. The realization struck him hard. There was no limit to Sung Jin Woo's powers. Norma nodded in agreement, confirming the terrifying truth. Director Brennan, now understanding the gravity of the situation, thanked Norma Selner for her time. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what they had just learned. Michael watched as Director Brennan abruptly stood up from his desk, clearly with a plan in mind. Curiosity piqued. He asked where the director was headed. Brennan, without missing a beat, instructed Michael to follow him to the basement level 24. Both men walked briskly to the elevator and stepped inside. As the elevator descended, Brennan began to speak. He explained that if they couldn't use Norma Selner's abilities to recruit Sung Jin-woo, they would need to find another way. He reminded Michael of the first ever S-rank gate that had opened, an event that no one could forget. Michael nodded, recalling the catastrophic dungeon break that had destroyed the entire West Coast area. In response to that disaster, America had recruited the world's strongest hunters by offering them huge rewards. Out of all those who participated, only 5 had survived the raid, earning them the title of national-level hunters, a rank that came with authority equal to that of an. Among the monsters they faced was Kamish, the dragon known as the Inextinguishable Flame. Kamish had single-handedly killed hundreds of top-ranking hunters, leaving a devastating mark on history. As they reached the basement level, Director Brennan asked if Michael could believe there was a silver lining to that tragedy. Michael hesitated, but then realized what the director was implying. Brennan confirmed his suspicion as they entered the last room on the level. Inside, Brennan approached the safe and carefully opened it, revealing a heavily secured runestone inside a tempered glass box. This was the runestone that had come from Kamish's remains. Brennan explained that it had been 8 years since the Kamish raid, and there had yet to be a mage-class national-level hunter. The runestone had been waiting in this cold basement, its rightful owner still unknown. However, Brennan believed that Kamish would once again bestow a valuable gift upon their country. As he looked at the mortal remains of Kamish, Brennan's mind raced with possibilities, hoping that this powerful artifact could be the key to their current predicament. After his shower, Jin-woo stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining his reflection. He noticed that since his reawakening, he had grown a few inches taller and had become more fit. Jin-woo wondered if he had really changed that much, as he considered himself fairly slim with average looks. He pondered whether the buffs he had gained from the will to survive were responsible for these changes. The ability stated that any damages to the body will be restored, so perhaps that included clearing up his skin as well. Curious about how others perceived him, Jin-woo peeked into the living room where his sister, Gina, was lying on the couch. Grinning, he decided to ask for her opinion on his appearance. Gina, however, wasn't impressed and playfully teased him, saying he just looked like a bum in her eyes. Jin-woo responded by pinching her cheek, which led to her usual kick at his shin, though she only ended up hurting herself. Amused by their banter, Jin-woo reminded Gina of his strength and jokingly questioned how she managed to get into school with such a bird brain. Gina proudly declared that she was at the top of her class, though Jin-woo pointed out it was only for her mock exams. The conversation shifted when Jin-woo mentioned his plans to form a new guild. Gina, intrigued, asked about the name he had in mind. Jin-woo suggested Solo Play Guild, but Gina quickly pointed out that it didn't make sense since he used his abilities to summon shadow soldiers, meaning he wasn't truly a solo player. After considering her brother's idea, Gina suggested the name Ajin Guild. She explained that the characters A meant I and Jin meant to go forward. Jin-woo found the name clever, especially when Gina revealed that she chose it because it was her name spelled backward. Jin-woo agreed that Ajin was not too bad of a name for his new guild. That night, Hae-in lay under her blanket feeling overwhelmed with embarrassment. The memory of her earlier conversation played over and over in her mind. She couldn't believe she had said, "I think so." It was practically a confession, and the thought made her cringe. As she burrowed deeper into her blanket, she couldn't help but wonder about Jin Woo's response to her words. Jin-woo had questioned whether there wasn't a better way to handle the situation than joining the guild. At the time, Hae-in had used the excuse of needing to think it over as a way to escape the conversation. But now, every time she reflected on that moment, her mind went blank, and her face flushed with embarrassment. She told herself that it was natural to be interested in Jin Woo since he had saved her life, but she knew deep down that her feelings were more complicated. Her thoughts drifted to Min Byung-yu, the healer whose abilities had actually saved her. Suddenly, a faint memory surfaced, a voice she had almost forgotten. Hae. In immersed herself deeply in her thoughts, desperately trying to latch onto the fleeting memory. It was recent, yet it felt so distant, like a dream that slips away just as you wake up. The memory tugged at her mind, pulling her out of the darkness. A voice echoed faintly, speaking about Jin Woo, urging her to remember. Slowly, the memory began to take shape, becoming clearer. It was Byung-gyu's shadow, tinged with an unusual worry that was unlike him. His eyes filled with concern as he spoke to her. He had told her to warn Jin Woo to tell him to be careful of the power he possessed. The realization sent a chill down Hae-in's spine as she finally remembered the encounter with Hunterman Byung-gyu. At the Knights Guild, the atmosphere was tense as Yoon-tae brought important news to Jong-su. At the Knights Guild, the atmosphere was tense as Yoon-tae brought important news to Jong-su. A new gate had appeared the previous day, and Yoon-tae informed him that it would be difficult for the guild to obtain a raid permit due to the gate's high rank. While it wasn't an S-rank gate, it was close enough to cause concern. Jang-su acknowledged the danger, knowing that the guild could face serious risks if they weren't careful during the raid. Yoon-tae explained that if the gate were S-rank, it would be best to give up on it altogether. The Knights Guild didn't have the manpower to form a proper assault squad for such a high-level gate. However, as one of the 5 major guilds in the country, they couldn't afford to fail without damaging their reputation. Jong-su was frustrated, understanding that most people underestimated the difficulty of a rank gates, thinking they were all the same. Yoon-tae mentioned that if they passed on this gate, the famed guild would likely seize the opportunity, which made Jong-su's eye twitch in irritation. The idea of handing over a gate that had appeared so close to their own territory was infuriating to him. He knew that while their A-rank hunters were strong, comparable to those in other major guilds, the lack of any S-rank hunters was what held them back. As they discussed their options, another hunter, Jung Yerim, an A-rank healer, joined the conversation. She suggested forming an alliance with another guild, but Jong-su was skeptical. He doubted any guild would agree to help, knowing that the Knights Guild only sought assistance because they didn't believe they could clear the gate on their own. Jung Yerim then proposed bringing in an individual hunter instead of forming a guild alliance. Jong-su was initially dismissive, questioning how a single hunter could make a difference in such a high-level raid. However, when she mentioned Sung Jin Woo, Jong-su reconsidered. He realized that joining forces with hunter Sung Jin Woo might not only improve their chances of safely clearing the gate, but also enhance their public image. Yoon-tae mentioned that Jin Woo had recently cleared an A-rank gate on a highway, but had otherwise kept a low profile. Decided that contacting Jin Woo directly was necessary, and instead of handling it over the phone, he resolved to visit Jin Woo in person to discuss this crucial matter. The next day, Jin Woo went to the office with a decision about the new guild name. He proposed the name Ajin Guild. Jin-ho was thrilled with the suggestion, feeling relieved that it wasn't something like Solo Play Guild. With the name settled, Jin-ho and Jin-ho knew they only needed to recruit one last founding member to complete the team. Jin-ho then asked about hunter Hae-in, curious about why Jin-ho hadn't chosen her. Jin Woo explained that she wasn't the right fit for their guild, leaving Jin-ho puzzled. Hae-in was an S-rank hunter, young, with an impressive record, and even beautiful, qualities that seemed perfect for their guild. But Jin Woo had something different in mind. He was looking for someone with a hunter's license who had no interest in joining a guild, but was still trustworthy. As they were discussing potential candidates, there was a knock at the door. Jin Woo wondered if it might be Hunter Cha again, but when he opened the door, he was met with 3 unfamiliar faces: Park Jong-su, the guild master of the Knights Guild, along with Yoon-tae and Jung Yerim. Jong-su introduced himself and then showed Jin Woo a video of a gigantic gate that had appeared in Busan city. The gate was massive, emitting an overwhelming amount of mana, which matched its size, although it had not been officially classified as S-rank by the association. This was the largest gate ever to appear in Busan, and the situation was urgent. As Jin Woo watched the video, he thought about Busan and briefly considered whether he should visit Juhi and have her treat him to some sashimi while he was there. As the conversation continued, Jung Yerim wondered if Jin Woo might give her an autograph if she asked. However, Park Jong-soo quickly shifted the discussion to a more pressing matter. He informed Jin Woo that the Hunters Association was refusing to grant them a raid permit for the massive gate because there were no S-rank hunters in the Knights Guild. The association believed the raid would be too risky under those circumstances, but there was a possibility they might get the permit if Jin Woo agreed to join their assault team. To sweeten the deal, Jong-soo offered Jin Woo 20% of the profits, a generous share compared to the usual 10% that S-rank hunters typically received. Jin Woo, however, had a different idea in mind. He proposed a 50-50 split, which took Jong-soo by surprise. Jin Woo explained that he would join them only if they treated him as a guild rather than an individual hunter. He also mentioned that he was in the process of founding his own guild called Ajin. Sweat trickled down Jong-soo's face as he tried to negotiate, offering a 40-60 split instead. But Jin Woo wasn't interested in haggling. Jong-soo, realizing that Jin Woo was far from a pushover despite his young appearance, agreed to the 50-50 terms. However, he added one condition: Jin Woo would need to defeat the dungeon boss. Jin Woo readily agreed. Jong-soo then mentioned that since it had been a while since the gate was discovered, they would need to raid it the next day at the latest. He offered to give Jin Woo a ride to Busan, but Jin Woo declined, explaining that he had plans for the day and would join them tomorrow instead. He assured them that he wouldn't be late. As they were wrapping up the meeting, Yoon-tae noticed something odd, thinking he saw Jin Woo's shadow move. Jong-soo brushed it off, wondering if Yoon-tae was drunk. Just as the meeting was about to end on a good note, Jin Woo's phone began vibrating on the table. Checking the caller ID, he saw a number he didn't recognize. Excusing himself, Jin Woo stepped outside the office to take the call. To his surprise, the familiar voice of his mother, Kyung-hee, greeted him. She had just bought a cell phone and called because she wanted to hear his voice. Jin Woo, happy to hear from her, suggested they have dinner together that night, as it had been a while since they last spent time together. Kyung-hee agreed, and Jin Woo looked forward to the evening with his mother. The next day, at Gwangali Beach in Busan, all the elite hunters of the Knights Guild gathered at the meeting place. There was a sense of excitement in the air as they anticipated the upcoming raid. However, the guildmaster, Jang-soo, was filled with nervousness. He anxiously awaited Jin Woo's arrival, regretting not insisting that Jin Woo come with them the day before. The time was ticking down with only 5 minutes left before they needed to start the raid. Meanwhile, Jin Woo stepped out of his apartment building, dressed casually in comfortable clothes and sneakers. He glanced up at the sky, noticing gray clouds gathering, briefly wondering if his sister Gina had taken an umbrella with her. But that thought quickly passed as he focused on the task ahead. Jin Woo knew it was time to move. He activated Shadow Exchange, seamlessly swapping places with his shadow soldier to reach the meeting point instantly. At Gwangali Beach, a large crowd had gathered, their eyes fixated on the enormous gate that had appeared despite the gloomy clouds hanging overhead. Among the onlookers was Jin Woo, who observed the scene intently. The gate was even more imposing up close, its size daunting. Jin Woo took note of the various teams assembled for the raid. The hauling team was stationed on one side, while the mining team was on the opposite end. The assault team, consisting of 13 A-rank hunters and 20 B-rank hunters, stood ready. Jin Woo couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer number of A-rank hunters present. It was a testament to the strength of the Knights Guild, known for having the highest number of A-rank hunters under their command. As Jin Woo emerged from his thoughts, he found himself surrounded by the other hunters. They were eager and curious, their questions coming at him in rapid succession. They marveled at his abilities, especially after witnessing his performance during the Jeju Island raid. The sheer number of shadow soldiers he could summon left them in awe. Sensing Jin Woo's unease, Yerim, the healer of the Knights Guild's elite assault team, stepped in to help. She introduced herself to Jin Woo, expressing her hope that they could work well together given their roles in the raid. Yerim's intervention was a relief for Jin Woo, providing a brief respite from the barrage of questions. Jong-soo Park, the guildmaster, was thrilled to see Jin Woo and greeted him enthusiastically. However, Jin Woo was surprised to learn that Jong-soo had not yet informed the other hunters about the leadership arrangement for the raid. Jong-soo quickly addressed the group, announcing that he, as the guildmaster, would be leading the raid. This news was met with some disappointment from the other hunters who had hoped that Jin Woo would take charge. Despite the grumbling, Dong-su explained that Jin Woo would be responsible for protecting the back line, ensuring everyone's safety. Some hunters questioned whether they needed protection, feeling confident in their abilities. Dong-su, however, took their remarks in stride, acknowledging their confidence and urging everyone to get started. At a high school, where 3 students walk down the hallway, casually chatting about their workload. They grumble about having to handle a task that should be the art teacher's responsibility. As they approach a classroom, one of them wonders how many statues they need to bring in. According to their instructions, there should be around 6, and sure enough, that's exactly how many they find inside. Another student complains that even if they each take one, they'll still have to make another trip. The third suggests grabbing all of them at once to save time. Stepping inside, they immediately notice the thick layer of dust coating everything. The neglected state of the room sparks a brief conversation. Had anyone even cleaned this place recently? However, their thoughts quickly shift back to the statues. At first glance, they assume these figures have simply been left untouched for a long time. But then, something unexpected happens. One of the students suddenly spots a mysterious gate at the back of the classroom. Stunned, he points it out to his friends. Another reassures him, saying there's no reason to be scared. As long as the gate remains closed, nothing can come through. Only hunters can enter these portals, and they typically remain sealed for about a week before activating. However, the third student hesitates, recalling that they had been told the building was completely unoccupied. That's when it happens. Without warning, a massive green hand bursts through the gate, grabbing one of them by the head and lifting him effortlessly into the air. His terrified screams for help send a wave of panic through his friends. Their horror intensifies as an orc begins emerging from the portal. Within minutes, the classroom is a massacre. The bodies of the students lie motionless on the floor, their lives taken in an instant. The orc that had stepped through is unlike any ordinary monster. It exudes a deadly presence, its sheer strength making it clear that creatures far superior to humans exist in this world. Though they lack true intelligence, these beasts possess instincts far beyond those of mankind. The thick, metallic scent of blood fills the air, stirring their primal urges. But these orcs were not here simply to kill. They had a mission. As scouts, they had to suppress their hunger and focus on their objective. For the hunter, lurking in the shadows, tracking its prey for weeks, there was no need to search any longer. Its instincts told it everything. It was surrounded by potential victims, and the true hunt was only just beginning. The structure bore a resemblance to a citadel in certain aspects. One of the orcs declared his intent to initiate the hunt, while instructing another to summon their kin. This orc was resolute. After eliminating the humans and securing this stronghold, they would commence the true hunt. His first priority was clearing the path ahead. As he stepped into the corridor, his gaze locked onto a group of students gathered at the far end. A girl among them was the first to notice the monstrous figure looming in the distance. The group turned to face the creature, confusion evident on their faces. However, the supreme orc wasted no time, launching an attack on the nearest individuals without hesitation. Meanwhile, Jin Woo observed the massive gate before him, its imposing form appearing even more daunting in person than in the footage he had previously seen. To his right, he spotted a collection team, and, to his left, an extraction team. Among the assembled forces, there were 38 rank H hunters and 20 Wang hunters, with an additional large contingent of rank A hunters. It made sense. This guild boasted the highest number of rank A hunters among its ranks. His contemplation was interrupted when he suddenly heard someone addressing him. Turning around, he was met with a crowd of hunters eagerly approaching, bombarding him with questions. They were awestruck by his previous raid on the island and particularly fascinated by his ability to summon shadow warriors. "Was that summoning magic?" they inquired. The flood of questions came too fast for Jin Woo to respond. Just as the situation grew overwhelming, a female hunter hurried forward, silencing the others. "Can't you see you're overwhelming Hunter Jin Woo with all your questions?" She chided the group before turning to introduce herself. Her name was Jung Rim, the head healer of the elite attack squad from the Knights Guild. With a confident smile, she remarked, "I don't know about the rest, but I think the two most responsible people here should get along, don't you?" She directed her question at Jin Woo. Before he could respond, another hunter stepped forward, the one he had spoken to in his office. "Now is the time," the man announced, addressing the gathered hunters. "I will be leading this raid." Murmurs of dissatisfaction rippled through the crowd. "Him again? Why?" "We already have Hunter Jin Woo," some complained. The leader remained firm. "Hunter Jin Woo will be backing us up, ensuring our safety." A few scoffed at the notion. "Does he really think we're that weak? That we need a babysitter?" One particularly bold hunter turned to Jin Woo. "Do you agree with this? Do you see our guild as a bunch of weaklings?" The leader stepped in before Jin Woo could answer. "That's not what this is about. Maybe the problem lies deeper, in the way some of you were brought up." He glanced at Jin Woo. "Wouldn't you agree?" Jin Woo smirked. "You're pretty confident, huh?" The moment to move out had arrived. The leader signaled and the raid officially commenced. At the same time, a distress call reached the Hunters Association. A woman at the Public Emergency Communication Center answered promptly. "This is the Emergency Response Center. How can we assist you?" The panicked voice on the other end replied, "Is this the association?" "Yes, that's correct. What's your emergency?" "Monsters! There are monsters inside our school. A dungeon gate has opened." The dispatcher's expression hardened. "Where are you now?" I'm hiding in the restroom," the student whimpered. "My friend, he's already dead." The dispatcher's grip tightened on the phone. "How many monsters have you seen?" "Can you describe them?" I don't know. There was too much screaming. It's probably over for me, too." "Listen to me," the dispatcher interjected, voice firm yet reassuring. "Hunters are already on their way. They won't abandon you. Just hold on a little longer. Can you do that?" The student sniffled, nodding despite knowing the dispatcher couldn't see her. "Oh, okay." "Good. Now, try to remember. What do the monsters look like? Any details will help." The girl hesitated before recalling something from TV. They have humanoid bodies but terrifying faces." Suddenly, she recalled that the creatures had green skin. They were orcs. She vividly remembered hearing about them on TV. However, at that very moment, an orc with a sinister grin had already entered the restroom, heading straight for the terrified student. A piercing scream echoed through the phone before the connection was abruptly cut off. Despite this, the dispatcher continued to yell, urging her to escape as soon as possible, warning that the creatures could smell blood. The last thing heard was the girl's desperate cry for help before her phone hit the ground. Meanwhile, students throughout the school began to flee in terror, horrified by the sight of blood splattered across the walls and floors. Amidst the chaos, one student hesitated, pleading with her friend to stop. Her friend was still inside the school. But the boy shook his head. "The hunters will handle it. We need to get out now." On one of the upper floors, a group of orcs surveyed the scene below. "Let them run," one sneered. "There are still plenty left hiding upstairs. Nowhere to run." Determined to leave no survivors, they turned toward the next floor. Meanwhile, in one of the devastated classrooms, a handful of students had barricaded the door, clutching makeshift weapons, school chairs, cleaning mops, anything they could use to defend themselves. They held their breath at the sound of approaching footsteps. Suddenly, with a deafening crash, the barricaded doors were obliterated. Before them stood a massive orc, his entire body drenched in blood. The beast's eyes locked onto a fleeing student, but he knew another was hiding just behind the wall. With one powerful swing of his axe, he shattered the partition, sealing the student's fate in an instant. The two orcs stood over their latest victim, their bodies pulsating with magic. "We should eliminate this one first," one muttered, sensing a potential threat. In a secluded classroom, a group of forgotten students huddled together. Among them was Jin Woo's sister, clutching her knees, silently praying for her brother to come and save her. Fear consumed her until a sudden shout pierced the air. One of the girls stood up, claiming she was a hunter, though not a ranked one. Jin Woo's sister grabbed her hand. "Stay calm!" The orcs focused on the girls. Initially, they assumed the hunter was the source of the strong magic radiating in the room, but as they sniffed the air, they realized it was coming from the girl beside her, Jin Woo's sister. One of the orcs raised his weapon, ready to strike her down, but just as he was about to attack, something intervened. The girls flinched, expecting the worst, yet nothing happened. When they opened their eyes, they saw a dark figure standing between them and the enemy, one of Jin Woo's shadow soldiers. The shadow orc gripped the green-skinned invader, hurling him through the air with terrifying force. The remaining orc, witnessing the scene, recoiled in fear. He stood frozen as 3 enormous orcs, his own kind, stood in front of him, now acting as protectors of the humans. He couldn't comprehend why they would turn against their own. Meanwhile, Jin Woo stepped into the dungeon alongside the other hunters. Cries of alarm rang out. "A 2-headed orc!" The leader snapped into action. "Everyone, focus!" This is a high-level opponent. The colossal orc let out a furious roar, raising his massive axe before swinging it at the hunters. The frontline defender swiftly activated his skill, erecting a barrier just in time. A massive shockwave erupted upon impact, but the barrier held. Barely. "I need backup!" the hunter shouted as he struggled against the force. Seizing the moment, another hunter dashed forward, leaping onto the giant's axe. He sprinted up the weapon's handle, closing in on the beast. With precise strikes, he slashed at both of the creature's heads, targeting its eyes. "Rely on me," he called to his comrades. Now blinded, the monster thrashed in agony. The other hunters wasted no time. This was their chance to strike. As it struggled to open its one uninjured eye, the creature realized it was already too late. The hunters had finished it off. Behind them, the mages swiftly unleashed their magic. A massive bolt of lightning struck down, followed by a fiery downpour that engulfed the enormous beast, bringing it crashing to the ground. The hunters took a moment to scan their surroundings before pressing forward. Their leader assessed the situation and knew this expedition would be far from simple. Right from the start, they had been met with a 2-headed ogre. Turning to Jin Woo, the leader questioned whether he understood the true nature of their mission. Without hesitation, Jin Woo responded. They were grave keepers. If this were just an ordinary dungeon, it wouldn't be a concern. But encountering a 2-headed ogre right at the entrance could only mean one thing. This place was crawling with the undead. The moment the realization hit them, the figures materialized, sending a wave of unease through the hunters. They turned to their leader, seeking direction. Should they attack or hold back? But before any decision could be made, the creatures suddenly froze and then retreated. The hunters were left puzzled. It was unusual for living beings to flee instead of attacking. Perhaps they sensed something far more terrifying lurking nearby. Jin Woo, observing from behind, hadn't anticipated this turn of events when he first stepped into this place. A strange sensation washed over him. Without hesitation, he turned to the hunters and declared that he needed to leave immediately due to pressing matters. His abrupt decision confused the leader, who protested that without him, their survival was uncertain. Jin Woo, however, remained firm. He assured them that he understood the situation, but had already arranged for someone reliable to handle it in his stead. The leader was left bewildered, unable to grasp what Jin Woo truly meant. Then, as Jin Woo summoned his general, Ant, the hunters stood in shock. They failed to recognize it as the same Ant from the island. Without wasting time on explanations, Jin Woo instructed his general to protect the hunters while eliminating anyone who posed a threat. Hearing this, Ant let out an exhilarated cry, eager for battle. The nearby hunters exchanged uneasy glances, realizing they were now following the lead of this formidable creature. The girl beside him addressed him as Mr. Jin Woo and called upon her own comrade. Moments later, a swarm of ants emerged, about 20 in total. However, the team's healer and some of the leaders still objected, claiming that Jin Woo had summoned a horde of monsters for no reason. With a serious expression, he offered them a choice.
He could recall them if they truly wished, but this was still better than having no backup at all. The gravity of his words left them no room for further protest, and they reluctantly agreed.
As Jin Woo stood amidst the group, he quickly checked the remaining cooldown time on his skill, 1 hour and 42 minutes. The timing felt off, but there was no time to dwell on it. Urgency gripped him as he bolted toward the dungeon exit, sprinting at full speed. The signals from his shadow soldiers stationed near his sister remained active, giving him a sinking feeling. Then, in the distance, a swarm of undead soldiers blocked his path. Without hesitation, Jin Woo shouted for them to move aside. To his surprise, the undead fell to their knees, bowing before him. The realization struck him. His command over necromancy was the reason for their reverence. But there was no time to contemplate the implications. He swiftly summoned his dragon, Kaisel, who soared beneath him. Without missing a beat, Jin Woo mounted his dragon and shot out of the dungeon, heading straight for his sister. On the other side of the portal, spectators gazed in awe as Hunter Jin Woo streaked across the sky atop his dragon. Urging Kaisel to push beyond his limits, Jin Woo activated a skill that amplified all his shadow soldiers' strength by 50%. Meanwhile, the orcs guarding his sister fought viciously against the attacking enemies. The battle was fierce, but the green-skinned orcs were ultimately overwhelmed. The disciples, watching in astonishment, saw the supreme shadow orcs mercilessly cutting down their ordinary kin, ultimately overwhelming them. It didn't take long for them to realize that these creatures weren't their enemies, but were actually protecting one of the female disciples. They had chosen a side. Jin Woo's sister, standing behind one of the towering orcs, hesitantly asked if her brother had arrived. Instead of responding, the orc simply pointed his thumb toward the window, silently indicating that he would be there soon. Meanwhile, deep within the fortress, the final barrier shattered. An orc, seated on a throne, listened intently as one of his subordinates reported that Gurat, the chieftain of the Red Knife tribe, now had free reign. No one could stand in his way. Another orc, however, interjected, informing Gurat that some orcs had allied with humans. 3 of them were even stationed at the school. This news enraged Gurat. For the mightiest warriors of their clan to show weakness was disgraceful. Clutching his massive axe, he stood up, deciding to deal with them himself. A massacre was long overdue. Back in the dungeon, the ants fighting on behalf of the hunters let out triumphant roars as they tore through their opponents. The hunters, observing this spectacle, hesitated, unsure whether they should continue their raid or retreat while they still could. The thought of the ants turning on them was terrifying. However, the leader of the mountain team knew backing out now wasn't an option. Even if they wanted to, the press wouldn't let them hear the end of it. Despite the unease among some hunters, there was no choice. They had to see this raid through to the end. Just then, Ant-Bear suddenly materialized near the leader, startling her. But before she could react, the creature disappeared in an instant, only to reappear in a flash. Moving with astonishing speed, it tossed something onto the ground at the leader's feet. Sitting up in shock, the leader found herself face to face with a massive ant. It simply glanced at her before turning away, leading its swarm elsewhere. The hunters rushed to the leader, asking if she was all right and what their next move should be. Should they follow or stay behind? The leader assured them she was fine. But as their eyes lowered, they froze in disbelief. Lying at their feet was the severed head of a Death Knight, one of the strongest monsters in the dungeon. The realization hit them like a storm. That ant had slain a high-level creature in a single strike. Its power was beyond comprehension. Then, a grin crept onto the leader's face. The value of high-tier mana crystals was immense, and with prey like this, they couldn't afford to leave now. Looking up, she saw the hunters moving toward the ants, ready to claim their share of the spoils. Meanwhile, at the school, a new battle erupted as Gurat arrived, taking position behind his war orcs. The warriors around him roared his name in unison. Gurat raised his voice, boasting that his tattoos were not mere decorations. They were symbols of the countless enemies he had slain. Examining his opponents, he acknowledged that they too had spilled plenty of blood.
but that was where their strength ended. Smirking, he swung his massive sword, telling the elite orcs to enjoy themselves while he handled the real entertainment.
Yet, just as he brought his weapon down, another orc intercepted the attack. But Gyrat was unfazed. With sheer force, he redoubled his strength and sliced the shadow orc clean in half. For a moment, he thought the fight was over, until the orc began regenerating before his eyes. That's when Gyrat realized it wasn't mere resilience, it was magic. No matter how many times he cut them down, they would always rise again. Frustration built inside him. He could slay 1, 100, or even 1,000 times, yet they would never stay dead. Then, an eerie whisper began echoing in his mind, urging him to exterminate all humans. The voice grew louder, more insistent, clouding his thoughts. He knew he had to act fast. The longer this dragged on, the stronger the influence would become. Thinking quickly, he reasoned that if these orcs were regenerating endlessly, the caster had to be nearby. His eyes narrowed. There was only one possibility. The girl hiding among her protectors had to be the source. If they captured her before the orcs could regenerate, they could put an end to this madness. But before they could reach her, the last remaining shadow orc grabbed 2 of his advancing warriors, leaving Jin Woo's sister exposed. Seizing the opportunity, another orc lunged forward, grasping her by the head. A sinister grin spread across his face as he sneered. He had known all along. It was her. He could feel the magic radiating from her. Chaos consumed the school. A powerful presence made itself known. It was none other than Jin Woo, who had finally arrived, and just in time. He reached out, placing his hand gently on his sister's head, his expression calm but filled with intensity. In a soothing voice, he reassured her that she was safe now, that everything was under control. Around them, the orcs began to retreat, a visible fear setting in as they felt the overwhelming pressure radiating from the hunter before them. Among the terrified orcs was one who stood out, Gyrat of the Red Knives. He stared wide-eyed at the massive dragon looming over the scene, and the mysterious hunter exuding a power unlike anything he'd ever felt before. As Gyrat attempted to speak, nervously introducing himself and asserting his rank, Jin Woo didn't even let him finish. Without turning his body, he raised his hand, pointed his index finger toward him, and with a sharp tone, commanded him to be silent. "Wait your turn," Jin Woo said coldly. He then turned back to his sister, embracing her tightly and apologizing for not arriving sooner. His concern for her was genuine, but his eyes held the kind of fury that only a brother could feel when someone had harmed his family. He scanned her face and immediately noticed the red mark, the result of the orc's brute strength lifting her into the air. That one detail ignited a storm within him. Without hesitation, he called forth one of his most trusted allies, his shadow commander, Ygritte. With a firm voice, he ordered Ygritte to look after his sister, ensuring her safety above all else. Jin Woo didn't stop there. More shadow soldiers appeared by his command, their silent presence brimming with lethal intent. He tasked them with escorting the rest of the students out of the now ruined school building. The orcs, who had once moved confidently through the halls, now stood frozen, paralyzed by the fear crawling up their spines. Some began to shift nervously, but Jin Woo's piercing eyes caught every movement. He raised his voice, firm and commanding, reminding them that he had already told them to stay put and wait for their turn. Outside, the massive dragon that had accompanied Jin Woo was waiting. Students, shocked and scared but unharmed, were being carefully loaded onto its back by the shadow soldiers. Meanwhile, one of the orcs dared to speak up. Confused and frightened, he muttered about Jin Woo's control over such terrifying warriors, and questioned how a human could possibly understand their language. But his words received no response, only the gaze of a hunter who looked more like a god of war than a man. The orc realized then that no explanation was coming. He had no time to think further. Jin Woo was already moving. The orcs launched themselves forward, hoping their numbers could make a difference. But Jin Woo didn't budge. He waited calmly, watching them approach. The first orc swung with all his might, but Jin Woo effortlessly caught the blow between two fingers.
The orc let out a guttural scream, agony tearing through his body. In mere seconds, he was crumpled to the ground, his feet smashing the earth as his massive form crashed down. Jin Woo ended it with a clean, precise kick that sent the orc flying into the rubble. Despite witnessing their comrade fall so easily, 2 more orcs made a run for it, hoping to escape the same fate. But Jin Woo had no intention of letting anyone walk away. He raised his hand and used his ruler's hand skill, a telekinetic force that grabbed both creatures mid-air. They struggled, suspended and helpless, until his fist clenched. Their bodies twisted grotesquely before being reduced to mangled, lifeless husks. The silence that followed was only broken by the panicked cries of the remaining orcs, who charged at Jin Woo in desperation. But Jin Woo didn't hold back. He surged forward, moving like a blur, his bare hands shredding through the enemy ranks. Orcs fell one after another, their bodies collapsing into heaps before they even knew what hit them. The floor became soaked in blood, and within seconds, the battle was over. All that remained was the orc leader, who cowered in a corner, too stunned to react. He stared at Jin Woo as
if he were a demon. No, something worse, something untouchable. Trembling, the orc tried to make sense of it all, but Jin Woo was already upon him. He reached out and grabbed the orc's head, slamming it against the wall with such force that the stone cracked behind him. Jin Woo held him there, staring into his eyes as if trying to pull out the answers himself. Then he looked around and saw the true horror of what had taken place. Bodies of students littering the halls, some unconscious, others barely breathing. Blood pooled beneath them, staining the floors. He turned down another corridor and saw the same scene. Fury boiled within him. He turned back to the orc and demanded to know why. "Why are you doing this? Why are you killing innocent people?" he asked. The orc, dazed, began speaking like he was under the influence of something, mentioning voices, commands, the feeling of being hunted himself. Jin Woo narrowed his eyes and asked again, this time softer but far more threatening. "And what about me? Do you want to kill me too?" Tears began streaming down the orc's face. He sobbed, begging Jin Woo for mercy. The hunter stared at him in silence, realization dawning. These creatures no longer saw him as human. He was something else to them, something far more terrifying. Then, without a word, his blade formed in his hand, gleaming with deadly energy. He looked at the orc one final time. "It doesn't matter anymore," Jin Woo said coldly. "I'll spare you, but you're not going to enjoy it." Elsewhere, deep within a massive dungeon, the Night Guild had begun their raid. Inside, a group of hunters was busy dealing with the aftermath of a brutal clash. One of the healers, a young woman with an anxious look, tugged on her teammate's robe. She tried to reason with him, explaining how costly these battles were. But her words fell on deaf ears. The Ant General, focused only on consuming the defeated monsters, didn't even acknowledge her. She watched in frustration as he devoured a vampire monster without hesitation. "Do you know how rare vampire soul crystals are?" she whispered, half in disbelief, half in anger. But her voice didn't stop the Ant General, who continued tearing through the corpses. As she tried to get closer, he accidentally scratched her with one of his claws. Startled, she looked up, prepared to yell at him, but what she saw next shocked her. The Ant General extended his massive claw and used healing magic on her wound. Instantly, the injury vanished without a trace. She blinked, stunned. You used healing magic?" she asked, bewildered. It wasn't just that he had healed her. It was how effective the healing was. She couldn't wrap her mind around it. "How can a shadow creature heal better than me?" What made it even stranger was that the Ant General didn't react with pride or acknowledgement. He simply turned and returned to his task like nothing had happened. The healer stood frozen, unsure of what to think. If even the shadows under Jin Woo's command had evolved to this extent, then what exactly had he become? A mighty ant stood as the general of his legion, commanding his forces through the dungeon's ominous passageways. Their march brought them to a massive door, which slowly creaked open. What lay beyond was enough to make even the most hardened hunters falter. The boss of the dungeon had already appeared, waiting with a bloodlust in his eyes.
The monster wasn't just any threat, it was an archmage, infamous among all dungeon entities. This archmage, notorious for its unmatched magic and intellect, had long been considered unbeatable. No guild had successfully brought it down. Yet thanks to one exceptional hunter, disaster was narrowly avoided. Still, the threat hadn't passed. From the rear came the groans and stomps of an undead horde, revived by the dungeon's cursed energy. Shouts rang out to shut the door, as creatures once devoured by the ants had risen again. The mage among the hunters quickly activated her sacred defense spell, forming a shimmering barrier around the team. But the leader, taking in the worsening situation, realized they were surrounded, and without the help of hunter Jin Woo, survival was uncertain.
The healer cried out that the sacred defense could only hold for 5 minutes at most. Suddenly, a commotion behind them caught the leader's attention. Turning, he saw the ant general advancing toward the archmage. The dungeon boss spoke in an eerily clear human tongue, its voice a mix of anger and confusion. It couldn't comprehend why the king's forces were attacking him. After all, they had been chosen by the king himself. The undead army hesitated, caught in their confusion, mirroring the archmage's own disbelief. He muttered that he would report this betrayal to the king, but the ant general didn't wait for further discussion. Launching himself forward, he slammed into the boss with crushing force, sending it flying across the chamber. "You talk too much for someone on death's doorstep," the ant general growled as he pursued the archmage. Just as the boss tried to recover, the ant performed a shocking act. Reaching into his own chest, he tore out his heart, using his overwhelming strength to rip it free. In doing so, the dark energy sustaining the dungeon's minions dissipated, and every undead servant collapsed instantly. The hunters, stunned by what they had witnessed, could barely process what had just occurred. One ant had wiped out the dungeon boss and its army in a single brutal moment. The raid leader, watching the ant feast on the fallen archmage, muttered in disbelief. He knew the creature was under possession, but this level of power was far beyond his expectations. Another hunter approached and remarked that with an army like this, shadow hunter Jin Woo didn't even need to lift a finger. His summoned soldiers alone could clear any dungeon with ease. Reflecting on the battle, the hunter noted that Jin Woo hadn't even used his full mana to summon these shadows. Half his power was enough to dominate. This realization forced them to question everything. Tactics, gear, strategy. Many conventional items might now be useless in the face of such overwhelming force. A third hunter casually suggested they scrap their original mission and consider joining Jin Woo's guild. The leader scoffed in disgust, calling the idea ridiculous. His guild was one of the top 5 in the country, created by a high-ranking knight-type hunter. The notion of merging with another guild, even one led by Jin Woo, felt insulting. The hunter quickly backpedaled, saying he was just joking. Clearly, after today's display, it was evident Jin Woo had no need for them. Still, the leader wasn't amused. He began ranting about how some people, after becoming S rank, thought themselves above the law. Even if Jin Woo could clear dungeons alone, rules were still rules. Raids were supposed to be carried out by teams, including the hunter leading the charge. Yet another hunter countered, suggesting they could simply act as support. Provide Jin Woo with backup, lend their numbers, and call it a win-win situation. The leader mulled it over. Maybe if they spun it the right way, claiming to offer help rather than submit, they could retain their dignity. As their conversation continued, rain began to pour outside. Back at the school, the scene was chaotic. Parents had gathered, desperate for answers and frantic to see their children. Some wept as stretchers passed, carrying the wounded. Amid this chaos, Jin Woo sat in a car beside the president of the Hunters Association. The president shared some bittersweet news. 213 students had escaped at the outset, and 10 more had been safely rescued. He added that had they reacted faster, things might have turned out differently. Then, he handed his phone to Jin Woo, displaying a troubling report. Over the past 6 months, dungeon appearances had skyrocketed. Globally, the numbers were rising at an exponential rate, and something else was happening. More people were awakening abilities, stronger hunters were emerging. It was as if the world itself was adapting, or being reshaped. Jin Woo stared at the data, realization dawning in his eyes.
Something massive was unfolding. He asked about the status of other nations: Japan, America, China, France, England, Germany, even places as remote as Central Asia. The president explained that several countries had expressed interest in reaching out. Some had done so through unofficial channels already. While the association couldn't stop such contacts, it had been working to protect Jin Woo's information. Of course, everything hinged on Jin Woo's choices. The president admitted he feared what might happen if Jin Woo left the country now. Adapting to a new place might not be easy, even for someone like him. Their ride eventually brought them to a hospital. Jin Woo's sister was recovering there. As he stepped out, the president made one final request. He said the association would do whatever it could to support Jin Woo and pleaded with him to remain in South Korea, to be part of their nation's future. Out of the 10 registered special hunters, 3 were already lost. 2 had been killed overseas by monsters. The president begged him to consider their shared destiny. And then, softly, he asked Jin Woo what he truly wanted. Jin Woo's response was calm but firm. If that was the case, he said, then he wanted permission to enter the dungeon atop the mountain, alone. The president paused, unsure if he had heard right. He clarified. Jin Woo wanted the restriction removed, the rule requiring a minimum number of raid members. Jin Woo nodded. That was exactly what he wanted. The president began explaining that the rule existed to safeguard lives. No hunter should risk a dungeon alone, but Jin Woo's
resolve didn't waver. Then, realization hit the president. The reason Jin Woo had created a guild wasn't for fame or manpower, it was so he could legally tackle dungeons solo. And now he was asking, would the association allow it? The president, aware of Jin Woo's overwhelming capabilities, admitted that it would be difficult, but not out of reach, and promised to do his utmost. As he spoke, one of the cameramen complimented the reporter on her excellent coverage. She smiled and thanked him, just as her phone rang. It was her brother, casually asking if she'd considered joining their guild instead of continuing to work in the shadow of their father's department. The sudden proposal left her confused. Her brother, Jin Ho, then asked if she had heard about Jin Woo's return to Korea. She confirmed she had, though her thoughts were more preoccupied with the fact that their guild still needed one more member to be official. She playfully accused Jin Ho of trying to recruit her into a guild that didn't even exist yet, joking that he must have gotten mixed up with some shady character. But Jin Ho insisted that if she knew who that person was, she'd be stunned. Standing nearby, Jin Woo was taken aback. It turned out this was the person Jin Ho had mentioned earlier. Jin Ho introduced her, Soo Hyun, his cousin, and a high-ranking hunter. She pulled down her mask and looked equally shocked to see Jin Woo. Jin Ho laughed, asking her why she was so surprised. Wasn't she somewhat of a celebrity herself? Jin Woo started to doubt whether she was truly a hunter. She responded that meeting the Jin Woo, who had mysteriously appeared at Lee Min-sun's press conference only to vanish again, was like meeting a legend. Jin Woo took a seat, reflecting that while Jin Ho was a D-rank hunter, his cousin was an A-rank. It made him wonder whether awakened powers were sometimes inherited. After all, he'd heard their father was a hunter too. He turned to Soo Hyun and hoped Jin Ho had already filled her in. She nodded, explaining that they needed just one more person to complete the guild. Jin Woo asked if she was really okay with joining, especially with the kind of attention it might draw. She casually brushed it off, saying anything was better than answering to her cousin Eugene's hot-headed son. Then, with a grin, she asked if she could take a selfie with Jin Woo for her socials. Elsewhere, at the Hunter Association headquarters, discussions were underway regarding Jin Woo's shadow army. Despite their effectiveness, the association seemed uneasy. Jin Woo found it odd. They, of all people, should recognize the advantage. But the association's president confirmed. This was a privilege. And then he posed a question. If monsters erupted from a dungeon, who would they send? 20 seasoned hunters, or a single one-man army like Jin Woo? Jin Woo, who had recently moved into a luxury apartment in the Hunter district, had clearly been making some changes.
When questioned about the move, he refused to comment, possibly because it was about securing safety. The president then continued, "Just like citizens move to safer areas when they can afford to, so too did Jin Woo. And if people criticize the privilege, they should remember who'd be standing at the front lines when Korea faced an S-rank gate." Across town, Huntress Cha scrolled through social media, stunned by a new post. A girl claiming it was her first day in the Ajin Guild. Her hands trembled with fury. The next day, Jin Woo and Jin Ho stood before a massive gate, unlike anything they'd seen. Jin Woo couldn't help but think that if Jin Ho had seen something like this before, he'd have passed out. Reporters surrounded them, shouting questions. What was the meaning behind the Ajin Guild's name? What was his connection to Soo Hyun? But before he could answer, Hunter Association personnel whisked him away. They told him that although they tried to hide information, the dungeon's location had leaked, likely because of a social media post. Jin Woo needed to be more careful. Meanwhile, Jin Ho asked nervously how they'd manage without the mining crew or the collection squads. Jin Woo reassured him his shadows would handle everything.
One of the association officers began inspecting the shadow soldiers. Using his scanner, he discovered their astonishing ranks. They were more than capable of clearing this dungeon. He now understood why the chairman insisted he tag along. After confirming the shadow's capabilities, he stripped off his suit to blend in better and avoid detection. He volunteered to supervise the operation directly and hoped Jin Woo would be okay with it. Jin Woo nodded his approval, and soon the raid commenced. Inside the dungeon, the shadows sprang into action, tearing through A-rank monsters with ruthless precision. Even elite hunters struggled against these beasts, but the shadows, swift and relentless, gave them no chance. When the officer's gaze shifted to Commander Igris, he was awestruck. Igris wielded a powerful new sword, delivering lightning-fast strikes imbued with crackling energy. Each blow decimated enemies. Among all the shadows, one particularly caught his attention. It had to be at least S rank, possibly higher. Maybe, just maybe, this single shadow could clear the dungeon on its own. Then, his focus shifted to Jin Woo, who had just kicked one of the ants away. It had started munching on fallen monsters. Jin Ho panicked, complaining that those monsters were extremely valuable. He scolded the other shadows too, yelling at them to get it together. The association officer silently acknowledged that this guild wasn't a group of just one hunter. It was something far greater. Suddenly, the dungeon boss appeared. Jin Woo dismissed all shadows except for the mining team. The officer was confused. Why withdraw such a powerful force? But Jin Woo unsheathed his sword and simply said that relying too much on his shadows would dull his own edge. And then he moved, like a blur, straight at the boss. In one instant, the creature was torn apart. A system message appeared. The dungeon boss had been eliminated. Jin Woo's level increased to 101, and several of his skills were enhanced. Shadow Summoning, Monarch's Domain, Guardian of Shadows. The cooldown of Shadow Exchange dropped from 3 hours to 2. Now, he realized, he could reach his mother and sister faster than ever, no matter how far apart they were. Behind him, the association officer marveled at how Jin Woo had pierced a dungeon boss known for impenetrable scales. And then, to his amazement, Jin Woo used his ability to extract a shadow from the fallen boss. The extraction was a success. The shadow's starting level was 13. Jin Woo studied it closely. It resembled his shadow mage, Fong, not just in classification, but in appearance too. Though it appeared smaller than usual, which was odd since their sizes typically stayed consistent, it radiated a potent magical aura. It reminded him slightly of his own fangs. Maybe this is just a compressed form. Maybe he can grow larger when needed. That must be his actual form. Regardless, it was another powerful addition to his growing army. All that remained was naming the new soldier. After a brief moment of thought, Jin Woo settled on the name Jim. Once the system confirmed the name, Jin Ho, observing from the side, couldn't help but admire how his mentor wasn't just copying creatures. He was molding beasts of terrifying power. But before they could linger on the moment, the dungeon began to tremble and collapse.
The boss was dead, and the gate was preparing to close. Everyone made a break for the exit, but Jin Woo hesitated. He glanced back. He had to move this one quickly. As they emerged from the dungeon, the crowd of waiting reporters gasped at the sight of a towering orc with a massive beast slung over its shoulder. Initial panic erupted. People mistook it for a dungeon breakout. But then, realization struck. That orc was a shadow. Hunter Sung Jin Woo's shadow. The shock turned into awe as flashes from cameras lit up the scene. The giant orc scratched its head awkwardly, slowly understanding it was being photographed, and responded with a sheepish grin. As the other hunters filed out, Jin-ho nudged Jin Woo, encouraging him to smile for the crowd. Reporters were swarming them now, hungry for a headline. Jin Woo wasn't interested in the attention, but it was too late to avoid it. Meanwhile, a representative from the Hunter Association, still shaken from what he'd witnessed inside the dungeon, had returned to HQ. His face was pale, almost void of emotion, as he met with the association's president. "This wasn't a raid," the man muttered. "It was a slaughter."
The president nodded solemnly. He told the man to rest, understanding now just how overwhelming the encounter had been. Once alone, the president turned to the window, deep in thought. Corpse recovery. Magic crystal extraction. Everything else aside, that dungeon had been cleared by one man. In reality, Jin Woo was the guild. And not only had he not failed Korea, he may have just become its greatest asset, perhaps even the world's. Change was coming to the way hunters were managed. At the same time, across the sea in Tokyo, Japan, a massive red gate opened, stretching across the sky. Its size and ominous presence stunned the city. Confusion and fear rippled through the streets, broken only by a low, distant growl. Inside a private estate, where the infamous Naked Blade Guild resided, an emergency gathering of Japan's top guild leaders took place. Something serious was happening. As one of the guards looked out from the balcony, he spotted approaching figures. Among them were elite S-rank hunters, including the feared Motor Rangers' disciples and representatives of the Naked Blade Guild. However, someone in the group mistakenly addressed one of the arrivals as a co-owner, only to be harshly corrected. It was the leader himself. The room turned tense as news broke. 7 S-rank hunters had been lost in recent events, including Guruji, a prized asset of the association's head, Masamoto. While the guild once enjoyed dominance, it now teetered on the brink of collapse. If things turned in their favor, though, they still had a shot at becoming Japan's strongest. But fear had crept in. Without a true leader guiding them, the hunters were clearly shaken. In a corner of the room, a hunter whispered to her comrade about rumors that the Amway Guild was planning to absorb the Soulless Guild. Both boasted 4 orange-ranked hunters, just like them. Her teammate scoffed. "You really think merging those two will make them the strongest in Japan?" "That's a joke. Even if every guild joined forces, it still wouldn't be enough." Not long after, inside one of the rooms, a heated voice broke the tension. One of the men stood up, shouting in frustration. Why was the association remaining silent? How could an S-rank gate appear right in the middle of the city, with no immediate response? He insisted that this level of negligence from the association was unacceptable, and demanded that everyone speak frankly. What if those monsters started pouring out right now? Someone at the table responded calmly. Even if every S-rank hunter in the country banded together, they still wouldn't be enough to deal with an S-rank gate of this scale. He proposed an alternative: summon the national-level hunters. That was the only viable strategy. Then, another figure, marked by a deep scar across his face, interrupted with irritation. He revealed that he was the Prime Minister, and had gathered the top guild leaders not to ask foolish questions, but to find real solutions. He warned that the potential outcome could mirror the disaster that unfolded on Xinjiang Island. Across from him, another man leaned forward, challenging his pessimism. Did the Prime Minister have no concrete plan? Why hadn't he considered bringing in someone like Thomas Andre? That sparked murmurs. Others pointed out that even if they wanted to hire Thomas, the cost would be astronomical.
There weren't enough funds or available mercenaries to make that happen. The increasing number of dungeons had drained their resources and left them with few viable options, and even fewer hunters would willingly dive into an S-rank dungeon. Suddenly, a voice offered a possibility. There was one person who might be willing to help, though definitely not for free. Yuri Orlov. Talks were already underway to bring in his tank for support. Meanwhile, several hundred kilometers away, Jin Woo was driving. His mind wandered as he reflected on his progress. He'd just hit level 101. That was when he unlocked the key to Carden Temple, and his abilities had spiked dramatically. He couldn't help but wonder what would come next at level 102. When he finally arrived at his destination, he stepped out of the car and recalled that his deputy had completed the task solo. It was impressive how proactive he'd been, but they still needed more members. That's when Jin Woo suddenly noticed someone walking nearby, Hunter Cha. On instinct, he turned to head in the opposite direction. But he didn't get far. With a shift of resolve, Jin Woo spun back around and approached her directly. He asked, somewhat awkwardly, why she was trying to avoid him, and what brought her near their office. Looking a bit flustered, Cha waved her hands and mentioned something about a car in the parking lot. That's when Jin Woo remembered. He couldn't move the car himself because of his shadow swap. Just as he was turning to go, Cha asked him, almost hesitantly, if he had a moment to talk.
What she really wanted to ask had been bothering her for a while. She'd seen some photos online, rumors swirling about a new recruit. She couldn't understand why she had been passed over, especially for someone ranked below S. Was Jin Woo actually dating her? But instead of pressing that question, she shifted gears. She said she had come to deliver a message to Hunter Ming Bingu. But before she could finish, Jin Woo raised a hand and asked her to wait. They could discuss it properly inside. Once in the office, Cha asked who else was around. Jin Woo replied that the deputy had stayed at the previous location. He then asked about the message from Ming. What exactly had happened? She explained that she'd heard a strange voice that day, one that had instructed her to pass along a warning. Be wary. The one pulled from eternal darkness is no longer the same. Though he retained the Raza, the voice continued. He now felt like a servant shaped by that darkness itself. It had given him immense joy, but also filled him with fear. She'd asked him what it meant, and he told her this power, this force, was dangerous, something they both needed to be aware of. She needed to remember the true army of dream hunters, that he himself was that army. The words stuck with Jin Woo. Later, he sat alone in a dungeon, mulling them over. Whether the message was a warning or nonsense, he couldn't ignore it. If nothing else, he owed it to himself to understand the true nature of his strength. Because this was no longer about defeating monsters, it was about uncovering the deeper force he had tapped into. Out of nowhere, Jin Ho, his ever-curious deputy, glanced over between bites of food and brought up how this all reminded him of descending into dungeons during his lower-rank days. Jin Woo wasn't thrilled by the way he was speaking with his mouth full, but Jin Ho kept going. He asked if, since Jin Woo's shadows could now move independently, maybe they could start handling daily tasks for him when he was too busy, like during meals. Jin Woo shook his head and clarified. That wasn't how it worked. The farther his shadows were from him, the less feedback and experience he'd receive. More importantly, he had no real idea what they were up to when unsupervised. Then, Jin Ho shifted the subject, asking how Jin Woo's sister was doing, mentioning how tough things must be for her right now. Jin Woo replied that he thought it best for her to rest for the time being. He had stationed some of his most skilled shadow soldiers near her, so for now, her safety wasn't something he needed to stress over. Still, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe he should check on her anyway. Activating his second-tier sense transmission ability, Jin Woo focused his attention on one of the shadows nearby to get a glimpse of her surroundings. Through its eyes, he saw her lounging on the couch, dozing off in front of a TV playing some movie. Nearby, an older woman, likely their aunt, was flipping through channels, clearly invested in finding something interesting. Satisfied, Jin Woo turned his attention elsewhere and noticed his mother shopping in a supermarket. Then, the image shifted again,
and suddenly he was looking into a bathroom where water was dripping into a tub, with Hunter Cha sitting inside. He instantly jerked his focus away, realizing he had accidentally intruded on something very private. Jin Ho looked at him, puzzled, and asked if he had dozed off mid-conversation. Jin Woo assured him that wasn't the case, and muttered that maybe he should prepare a small gift to apologize. Jin Ho, unaware of what had just happened, changed the subject again, and mentioned the massive S-rank gate that had opened in Japan. According to rumors, it was only 3 days away from completely destabilizing. Hunters were being summoned from all over, but curiously, no one had reached out to Jin Woo yet. But Jin Woo responded that they had contacted him. He simply hadn't accepted yet. There were pressing matters on his side, and he was still considering the offer. At the moment, his focus was on the key to the Kardun Temple. He wondered what kind of invitation this was from the system, and what revelations might be waiting for him inside. Enough talking. Jin Woo stood up with determination. There was only a single day left before the temple opened, and soon he'd find out the truth. Now that he'd finished eating, it was time to get back to business. Jin Ho jumped up to follow. Elsewhere, inside a corporate high-rise, Yuri Orlov stood at the head of a long table and confidently declared that when it came to tanks, no one outperformed him. He'd thoroughly reviewed the documents they'd sent, including plans for evacuation.
The lack of available manpower was no joke. In all of Japan, only 6 S-rank hunters could currently be deployed. The man seated across from Orlov nodded grimly. Every Japanese guild was spread thin, with even his own guild having already deployed 3 of their best, with 1 key member still held in reserve. Yuri wasn't impressed. With that little manpower, how could they possibly defend an entire nation? Setting his drink down, Orlov leaned in and calmly proposed his rate. $3.6 billion a year. That broke down to $10 million a day. For that price, he'd guard the gate for however long they needed him. He pointed out that compared to Thomas Andre, his rates were actually reasonable. The hunters standing behind looked at one another, clearly confused. They didn't speak his language and had no idea what he'd just said. From the tone, though, it didn't sound friendly. Yuri repeated himself more loudly. Pay $10 million per day, or risk losing everything. In these uncertain times, there was no room for hesitation. Either they secured their future or rolled the dice with fate. Even if they were to drop to their knees and beg, Yuri Orlov wouldn't bat an eye. Not even a shred of remorse would show on his face. The hunter seated across from him commented on how self-assured he was, to which Yuri simply nodded. Of course he was. Why wouldn't he be? Hiring him was smarter than gathering 100 weaklings, and if they didn't want to be humiliated, this was the time to make a wise decision. Meanwhile, the 2 S-rank hunters standing behind tensed noticeably. They couldn't understand what was being said, but Yuri's tone alone told them enough. He was mocking them. Just then, a 3rd hunter near them began to shift, perhaps preparing to act, but Yuri casually lifted a hand and warned them not to make a single move without his go-ahead. They hadn't stepped out of line, yet, but he made it clear, try anything, and see what happens. To their shock, they found they couldn't move at all, not even a twitch. Somehow, Yuri had locked them in place without lifting a finger. He calmly continued, saying that he would handle the gate himself, and, if they agreed, he'd throw in wiping out all the monsters as a bonus. That was the best offer they were going to get. Still, the hunter at the table said they'd reviewed Yuri's powers extensively. Despite that, he wasn't confident the government would approve such a massive budget for the operation. He paused, visibly torn, and wondered aloud whether Yuri could truly be relied on in this kind of emergency. Yuri gave a curt nod, understanding the hesitation, and told him to make the necessary call. Only one decision stood between them, and either salvation or disaster. Elsewhere, Jin Woo was getting ready to leave. He grabbed his gear and approached the door. His mother, seeing him off, asked if everything was all right. He let out a quiet sigh and assured her it was. He just needed to meet someone, but didn't say who. He said goodbye and walked out, knowing full well the clock was ticking.
As the final seconds drained from his stopwatch, the key in his palm began to react. It lit up faintly, guiding him toward the gate's location. This was the place. This was where it all began. The gate that only he could open now stood before him. And that brings us to the end.
Stood near a newly emerged gate. Among the onlookers was a young woman, struggling to process what she was seeing. It was beyond belief. Two gates had manifested at the same location simultaneously. Though the school nearby had been shut down, curious students still wandered dangerously close to the scene. Just then, she noticed a hooded figure approaching the gate. She moved to stop him, explaining that civilians weren't allowed in this area. But as he lowered his hood, her eyes widened. It was Hunter Sung Jin Woo. Without wasting time, he asked her when the gate had appeared. She answered, 3 days ago. That moment hit him like a wave of regret. No one had warned him the dungeon would activate so soon after locating it. If it had been open for 3 days, someone had likely already ventured inside. Judging from the magical energy, it didn't seem especially high-ranked. Jin Woo quickly asked whether a team of hunters had already entered. The girl confirmed. They'd gone in about 2 hours earlier. Alarmed, he insisted the exploration be halted immediately. The girl, confused, argued that their scans confirmed the dungeon was stable, but Jin Woo was adamant. Those hunters were in serious danger. If action wasn't taken fast, they wouldn't survive. Still confused, the girl watched as he entered the gate, instructing others not to follow. She couldn't grasp why he was acting with such urgency. He didn't offer a detailed explanation. He simply said there was no time for that. Inside the dungeon, the team of hunters stood before a massive sealed door. It was clearly the boss room, yet it was tightly shut. They couldn't understand why it wouldn't open. Even magic spells failed against it. Some hunters considered retreating. That's when Jin Woo arrived. Appearing without warning, he told them flatly. It was a trap. The hunters were startled and began questioning him. He introduced himself as an S-rank hunter, and his presence instantly changed the mood. They knew he wasn't just powerful. He was experienced. Jin Woo urged them to leave while they still could. He'd handle what was inside. Approaching the sealed door, he tried to open it, but it was magically locked. Suddenly, a message popped up before his eyes. The gates of the Kartanong Temple are sealed. A key is required. Jin Woo pulled out his key, but something felt off. This time, something was different. The hunters watched, puzzled by how he'd even gotten the door to respond. A nearby official apologized, explaining that this raid was already claimed, and not even an S-rank could override that. Jin Woo nodded and stepped back. If they were determined to go inside, he wouldn't interfere. He warned them again, though. Just then, another alert from the system flashed before Jin Woo. Unauthorized access detected. Defensive force will be deployed. The moment one of the hunters stepped forward, a massive stone guardian lunged at him, swinging a colossal hammer. But before the blow landed, Jin Woo yanked the hunter back just in time. The creature loomed in front of them, a monstrous sentinel guarding the entrance. Jin Woo turned to the others with one final warning. If they valued their lives, they should leave immediately and inform the Hunter Association. A dual dungeon had emerged. With that, Jin Woo stepped through the threshold alone. As the doors slammed shut behind him, a system alert confirmed the key holder had entered. The hall lit up with flickering torchlight. Everything was exactly as it had been the last time, unchanged and waiting. At the center stood a giant statue holding the commandments of the dungeon. Jin Woo's eyes locked onto it. This was where it had all begun. But something was different now. He saw the truth clearly. These figures weren't real monsters. They were hollow puppets. Only one being in this place truly mattered. His gaze fixed on the largest statue of them all, the one towering over the others. "So, you're still pretending to be silent?" he muttered. Suddenly, the statue grinned, a slow, horrifying smile creeping across its face. From under its hood came a voice, low and chilling. "You've finally arrived. We've been expecting you." Meanwhile, far away, Yuri Orlov landed at a Japanese airport. Reporters flooded the terminal, all eyes locked onto him.
That day, the press swarmed Yuri Orlov, shouting for his attention and bombarding him with questions about his strategy for sealing the gate. Calmly, he faced the cameras and explained that, as always, he would construct a magical barrier around the gate. Once the spell was activated, the area would be completely sealed. Nothing would get in or out. Given that this was an S-rank gate, many remained skeptical. A reporter pressed for more details, and Orlov responded without hesitation. He admitted that his own magic alone wouldn't be enough to sustain such a high-level barrier. But his plan relied on external energy sources. Specifically, he would harness ambient mana by placing mana crystals throughout Tokyo. Once the formation was complete, the spell would tap into the crystals, absorbing energy and forming a wall-like defense strong enough to contain even an S-rank threat. He assured everyone that the city would be safe, and that this would be a moment worth remembering. Elsewhere, the broadcast was being watched with grave concern by the president of the Hunter Association. He tried to focus on Orlov's confident words, but the looming possibility of failure haunted him. What if even Orlov couldn't hold the gate? Turning to his aide, he asked about the status of Hunter-sung Jin Woo. The assistant replied that Jin Woo was currently overseeing a dungeon in the Seoul district. He handed over a report listing the details of the dungeon, which had been cleared for entry at the request of the Ajin Guild. However, the assistant expressed concerns that there might be tension between Ajin and the larger guilds like White Tiger and Reapers over this. The association president found it hard to believe, a solo-run guild rivaling major powerhouses. The idea was absurd enough to be laughable, or maybe even tragic. His aide quietly agreed. The president then asked what the point of this strange arrangement was. The reply? They were simply instructed to ensure no one entered the dungeon site for a full week.
That seemed manageable, at least for now. Just then, the aide's phone rang. With the president's permission, he stepped aside to answer. Meanwhile, the president also excused himself for a scheduled meeting. On the call, the aide received an urgent update. There had been a critical situation at the raid location. He was reminded of the school where orcs had recently been seen. It had seemed minor at first glance, but now there were reports that a double dungeon had appeared in the gymnasium and that Hunter Jin Woo had entered alone. Inside the dungeon, Jin Woo now stood before a menacing statue that had begun to rise. From its back unfolded 6 massive wings made of stone. In its hands, the stone tablet engraved with the rules of the Kartanan Temple shattered. Jin Woo, observing everything closely, noted how the laws that once governed this place had crumbled. He spoke aloud, wondering if the original rules ever held real meaning. But the colossal figure, the creator, finally responded. It wasn't that simple, he explained. Those rules were obsolete now. Jin Woo questioned him further. Why had he been summoned here? The creator answered cryptically. That's exactly the point. But Jin Woo was more interested in the identity of the entity before him. Are you some kind of monster? He asked. The figure corrected him. That wasn't the question he should be asking. Instead, he should ask, Who are you? With a thunderous clap of his stone hands, the test began. All the statues in the chamber stirred to life. This would be the final trial. If Jin Woo could survive it, he would learn the truth about himself. That would be the creator's parting gift. Jin Woo moved to summon his shadow soldiers, but the creator snapped his fingers. A wave of suppression washed over the room. All class-based skills were disabled. This trial was meant for Jin Woo alone. His followers were irrelevant here. A system message flashed before his eyes. Potion purchases from the store are disabled. Healing through leveling or daily quests is unavailable. Standing there, Jin Woo reflected grimly. His most carefully hidden trump card had been rendered useless in an instant. But the stone warriors didn't wait. They charged at him. Drawing a deep breath, Jin Woo made a decision. His abilities might be sealed, but his inventory was still accessible. That would be enough. He'd handle this with his own hands. As one of the towering stone sentinels swung its massive sword toward him, Jin Woo intercepted the strike, his raw strength shattering the weapon mid-air. Without hesitation, he gripped a jagged fragment of the blade and hurled it back, embedding it deep into the guard's head.
The stone behemoth barely had time to register the impact before Jin Woo launched upward, planting a crushing kick on the embedded shard and driving it further through the statue's skull, slamming it into the ground. But there was no time to breathe. More sentinels advanced without pause. One swung a heavy weapon, but Jin Woo parried swiftly, slicing it clean in half with a precise twist of his arm. In a fluid motion, he rolled away and reappeared behind another enemy, dual blades in hand. In a brutal sweep, he jammed them into the back of the second statue's head, bringing it crashing down. From a distance, other sentries raised their bows, launching a volley of stone-tipped arrows his way. But Jin Woo met each projectile with perfect timing, slicing and deflecting them mid-flight. One particularly massive arrow whistled through the air. He caught it with a raised arm and, with a surge of energy, kicked it straight back at its archer. It hit with such force that a large chunk of the archer's stone face was ripped away. This was the moment Jin Woo had trained for, the moment he was born for. Every move was deliberate, every strike lethal. He began tearing through the enemy ranks with terrifying precision. The creator, silently observing the battle unfold, couldn't hide his astonishment. Jin Woo had become far stronger than he had ever anticipated. The once indiscernible movements of the statues were now crystal clear to Jin Woo. He could read their patterns, dodge with pinpoint timing, and counter without hesitation. Though the stone guards were mighty, he was confident now he would overcome them. Watching from above, ethereal figures murmured among themselves. He had indeed evolved, but this trial was far from over. The sense of danger intensified as the largest statue in the chamber began to stir. Rising to its full height, it radiated an overwhelming presence. The Creator's voice echoed through the hall. It is time to summon God. Meanwhile, several hundred kilometers away, a different meeting was underway. The president of the Korean Hunter Association sat across from the head of the Japanese Association. The Japanese chairman slid a document across the table, an agreement offering all the mana crystals from Jeju Island to South Korea.
The Korean president furrowed his brow. Why such generosity? The chairman explained his intent. They wished to secure Jin Woo's help. That brought a smile to the president's face. Calmly, he replied that Jin Woo wasn't bound to the association. But the Japanese official clarified. They weren't trying to compel anything. They simply hoped for the opportunity to speak with him. The president quietly considered the offer. Given the recent death of their strongest hunter, Goto Ryuji, Japan had no one left to contain the S-rank gate. Offering all those crystals in exchange for a conversation with Jin Woo wasn't as outrageous as it sounded. Considering what Jin Woo was capable of, the value lined up. Still, the president pushed the paper back and requested to continue the conversation without interpreters. The chairman was visibly surprised to learn the Korean president spoke Japanese. The latter explained that he had learned it as a child. His father once ran a business in Japan. Once the room cleared and the doors shut, the president's tone shifted. He leaned forward and warned the Japanese chairman sternly, if he was scheming again, he should drop it now. The chairman blinked, confused. But the Korean president pressed on. He had heard whispers, rumors that the Japanese Association had fallen into conflict with the Blade Guild, that their relationship had soured. At this, the chairman stood abruptly, his voice rising in protest. But the Korean president didn't stop. He laid it out clearly. The Blade Guild had been secretly funding the Japanese Association, and now things were falling apart. It wasn't difficult to figure out the situation. Things were clearly headed that way, especially considering the tight ties with the Japanese Association. But with the sudden death of Goto Ryuji, the one who commanded all the S-rank hunters, the system began to fall apart. Without his leadership, those powerful hunters were no longer easy to control, and the Blade Guild now teetered on the edge of collapse. Other guilds were fully occupied, dealing with ongoing gate incidents, most likely struggling to keep things contained. If the monsters from the gate in central Tokyo were to spill out, the blame would land squarely on the chairman's shoulders. The president began speaking, pointing out how Goto Ryuji had once been an exceptional asset to their nation. While Ryuji hadn't participated in the raid with pure motives, the failure lay in stripping authority from the Blade Guild. It was the chairman who had decided to fracture the guilds,
and now he couldn't manage the fallout. The blame for trying to manipulate the situation in the past fell solely on him. As the chairman looked on, he noticed the president place a black box on the table. While it wasn't a literal black box, it was the same kind of device Ryuji's team used for mission data. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The president's anger was palpable. He accused the chairman of believing he could keep everything hidden. Ignoring the topic of the crystals entirely, the president focused on the implications of those recordings going public. Ordinary citizens would be caught in the middle. The sheer weight of that thought drove him to a boiling point. He shattered the transmitter, and even the table between them, in a fit of rage. He declared that some cruel twist of fate was at play, and he had no intention of dragging the entire nation into chaos over one man's selfish actions. Reputations, alliances, none of it could be risked. If anything, they owed Jin Woo their thanks. Meanwhile, Jin Woo continued his fierce battle against the towering stone guardians. No matter how many statues he destroyed, more immediately took their place. It became clear this was a battle of endurance with no end in sight. That's when he sensed something massive behind him, a colossal statue far bigger than the rest. Realizing there was no way to evade it, Jin Woo activated his skill. Ruler's Touch. The statues chasing him were lifted into the air by its telekinetic force, but just as the enormous statue unleashed its I-beam attack, those airborne statues were obliterated by the blast. A system alert popped up. His Ruler's Touch had hit max level, unlocking a new skill. Ruler's Authority. The giant's beam was immensely powerful, melting everything in its path. Jin Woo managed to dodge, but barely. He knew, if he took a direct hit, not even his skills would save him. First, he had to take down the big one. With that thought, Jin Woo activated Sprint, leaping high into the air toward the massive statue, but the statue reacted, raising its foot to crush him. The ground shook as the foot slammed down. The statue's expression twisted into a smug grin, believing the hunter had been flattened. But to its surprise, a glowing trail appeared, darting in the opposite direction. From within the dust and smoke, Jin Woo emerged, ascending rapidly.
He charged at the statue's head, knowing another I-beam was coming. He combined Sprint with his newly unlocked Ruler's Authority, slipping into the creature's blind spot. Just as the beam was about to fire, Jin Woo was already out of sight, an almost impossible move. Though he hadn't landed a solid strike yet, he was stunned by the power of his new combo. With just a bit more refinement, this could become devastating. The statue, now aware of Jin Woo's presence on its shoulder, turned its head, only to see the hunter raising his Chaos Blade for a finishing blow. But as the attack landed, Jin Woo realized with shock he'd barely scratched it. Even a blade said to cut through anything hadn't pierced it. Accepting that brute force was the answer, Jin Woo launched off the statue's shoulder, eyes locked on a narrow crack on its face. It was the weakest point. With a fierce cry, he drove his blade straight into the gap. "Break, damn it!" The architect kept watching from a distance, fully aware that Jin Woo couldn't endure for long, but even he was impressed by the hunter's devastating strike. The towering statue was flung to the side with incredible force. Jin Woo had decided to unleash the full might of his level 103. The impact shook the entire chamber, and the massive statue finally lost its footing, crashing to the ground with a thunderous boom that echoed through the space. By the time the dust began to settle, Jin Woo had already landed. The stone sentinels around him quickly took notice and charged at him. But Jin Woo wasn't backing down. He activated his Ruler's Authority, and instantly, gravity seemed to betray the statues. Their bodies collapsed under the invisible weight, slamming into the ground. Their usual tactics were completely ineffective now. Clenching his fists, Jin Woo could feel just how far he'd come. The architect, still observing, started to clap slowly. He called Jin Woo's performance impressive, worthy of praise. But Jin Woo wasn't interested in compliments. He demanded that the architect fulfill his promise and reveal everything. However, the architect merely grinned and said the test wasn't over yet. "Did you forget about me?" he asked. At that moment, a new emergency quest appeared in Jin Woo's system window. The final trial was the architect himself.
Jin Woo read the notification carefully. If he couldn't defeat the opponent within the set time limit, his heart would cease to function. Only 10 minutes remained. As the timer began to tick down, Jin Woo asked the question that had been bothering him. "Who are you?" But the architect mocked him, calling it a foolish question, one he'd already answered. Just then, the mask on his face began to crack. With a chilling calm, he revealed the truth. He was the one who created the system. On this note, the episode 6 ended. Hunters had arrived. A girl rushed to meet them, urging them to hurry. At the front of the team was an inspector, quietly amazed that they had managed to gather 7 of the best hunters available on such short notice. But despite the reinforcements, he feared it wouldn't be enough to support Jin Woo. These hunters were only intended as backup, and as the inspector approached the gate, an ominous sensation gripped him, an unnatural, bone-chilling energy. Turning to the others, he asked if they felt it too, like standing under an icy downpour. The magic pressing against them was overwhelmingly intense. He began to wonder if any high-ranking hunters had joined them, but was told that the Hunters Guild was off-raiding, and only 2 S-rank hunters were currently available. Alarmed, the inspector ordered an emergency message to be sent immediately. Backup needed to arrive now. Back inside the gate, Jin Woo faced the architect, the strongest foe he'd ever encountered. In a flash, the architect's wings split into 6 muscular arms. Before Jin Woo could react, the architect vanished from sight and launched a sudden, brutal punch that sent Jin Woo flying into the wall. The sheer force drew blood, but the onslaught didn't stop there. The architect continued to attack, but this time Jin Woo was ready. He began dodging with precision, intercepting the flurry of blows. In a matter of seconds, he adapted, blocking, countering. The architect was stunned. Jin Woo had surpassed every expectation. Still, the architect landed a powerful strike across Jin Woo's face and smiled with a twisted sense of excitement. But Jin Woo wasn't done either. He countered with a vicious punch of his own, knocking the architect across the room. The architect stumbled, genuinely shocked. "A human is pushing me this far?" he muttered, unable to believe how thrilled he was to be fighting someone like Jin Woo. Jin Woo, meanwhile, was thinking back. Ever since he reached level 101, this being had summoned him, intending to eliminate him. But he'd survived. "I've got 100 questions," Jin Woo growled. "Why did you build this system? Why choose me?"
What's going on with my world? The architect didn't stop. Instead, he rushed forward again. "So desperate for answers," he taunted. "Afraid you'll lose your chance if you kill me?" Realizing close-range combat wouldn't work, Jin Woo sprinted to the side, preparing a ranged counterattack. The architect instantly sensed it and retaliated. The explosion rocked the area, and Jin Woo realized something terrifying. The architect could use the same skills he could. That plan was out. The architect didn't care. Whether he lived or died, his answer would remain the same. It was locked in from the moment the system was conceived. As Jin Woo pressed for answers, asking what the purpose of the system was and how he was granted such power, the architect replied coldly, "I didn't choose you. I didn't even like you back then." He had only created the system to grow a player, to evolve them. The timer continued to tick down. Jin Woo looked up. Just minutes remained. The architect floated into the air, declaring that he would fight at full strength until Jin Woo's heart stopped. Weapons materialized, sword, spear, axe, blade, and hammer, all hurtling toward Jin Woo. But this time, Jin Woo felt something. For the first time in this battle, he was completely in sync. Every motion, every weapon, he could read them. The architect watched in disbelief as Jin Woo dodged effortlessly, moving at a speed that made him invisible to the eye. Then, with one clean strike, Jin Woo severed one of the architect's stone arms. The architect winced. It may have been a temporary body, but the pain was real. He screamed in rage. "You're just a human! How dare you!" Only 3 minutes and 45 seconds remained. The statues on the ground began rising again, but Jin Woo didn't stop. He had to finish this. A massive guardian stood between him and the architect, with several smaller ones swarming alongside it.
Jin Woo soared into the air, activated his Monarch's might, and slammed into the earth, scattering the guards in all directions. Without hesitation, he lunged at the architect, cutting down his arms one by one. But just as he was closing in, something struck his shoulder hard. He turned. Another giant guardian, wielding a massive stone shield, stood before him. It was the same type that had once nearly defeated him, but the clock was still ticking, and Jin Woo had no intention of slowing down. He leapt high and crushed the guardian's skull with a single blow. 2 minutes left. He resumed his attack on the architect, slicing through stone arms and forcing him to the ground. The architect, breathing heavily, admitted defeat. "All the answers you're searching for. They're inside me," he said cryptically. Jin Woo was confused, but a system message appeared. Data collection complete. Accept or reject information? The truth he'd been chasing was finally within reach. "I accept," Jin Woo answered. A brilliant light engulfed him as the system transferred all the data.
Jin Woo found himself drifting in an unfamiliar realm. Suspended in the sky like a spirit, he watched countless monsters marching in a single direction. The sight was surreal. Below him stretched a sea of demons and beasts moving as one. As their heads slowly tilted upward, Jin Woo initially thought they were staring at him. But then he turned his gaze to the sky and saw an enormous gate slowly creaking open. Different regions below were overrun with monstrous beings, and it suddenly hit him. This was Earth, high orcs, goblins, and more. If these creatures escaped their dungeons, humanity wouldn't stand a chance. But the true threat lay far beyond these monsters. The final battle was drawing near, and Jin Woo now understood the gravity of the coming war. As silver-armored warriors emerged as humanity's foes, the monsters began to band together. A brutal clash erupted, filled with deafening metal strikes and blood-curdling cries. The land turned a deep crimson from the bloodshed, and it was clear the silver warriors were no pushovers. Just when it seemed the monsters would be wiped out, the heavenly fighters unexpectedly began to fall back. Then, Jin Woo saw a cloaked figure command the fallen to rise. He immediately recognized the Monarch Lord. From the shadows, an army emerged. A warrior clad in black armor rode a powerful steed, the Shadow Lord. He commanded an immortal legion, and as fear of death vanished, the monsters were enveloped in darkness, their strength multiplying, their blood thickening with power. Their numbers were endless. Jin Woo realized how tiny his own forces looked in comparison. Creatures that had just been slain were rising again, charging at the silver warriors with renewed ferocity. A massive battle between light and shadow unfolded, so intense it shook the earth beneath them. The flames of war, once dying, roared back to life. And amidst it all, only one being could tip the balance, Jin Woo. Observing everything from above, he finally grasped the true might of the Shadow Lord. The Shadow Army tore through the silver soldiers without pause, converting the fallen into their own. Wherever the Lord tread, destruction followed. Each victory the monsters claimed was a victory for their master, until a new force emerged. Meanwhile, back in the real world, a hunter from the association stood before a massive door alongside an inspector. The inspector asked if the door could be opened, but the hunter hesitated. He could sense a terrifying magic from within. He turned to the inspector, asking if Jin Woo was really behind those doors. The inspector confirmed it. Hae-in, watching closely, felt a strange aura. It wasn't Jin Woo's magic. She wondered who could wield such overwhelming power, something beyond imagination. Despite her dread, she longed to support Jin Woo, especially now. The inspector, troubled, questioned why Jin Woo had returned to such a place. He was sure Jin Woo had his reasons. As the door creaked open, the hunters struggled to comprehend the scene within. Statues, deities. It was all real. Then, unexpectedly, a being addressed them. It was the Creator. He asked how they had arrived, claiming he never summoned them. The hunters were stunned to hear the creature speak their language. The Creator warned them to stay silent, or they would wake the king. Then, they saw Jin Woo, standing motionless, illuminated strangely. They had no idea what was happening to him. In a sudden burst of violence, 4 hunters were killed by the Creator. Sneering, the Creator dismissed them as useless. Only the strong were fit to be sacrifices for the king. In his trance, Jin Woo watched as the Dark King battled waves of monsters pouring out of the Red Gate, an endless tide stretching across the horizon. Among them was a towering beast with a pale hide. The monster horde glared at the Dark King, who stood firm with his army, ready for battle. Meanwhile, inside the chamber where Jin Woo stood frozen, chaos erupted as the hunters who entered faced the colossal statues. Some were gravely injured and needed immediate care. One hunter shouted for everyone to reinforce their defense. The enemies were already on the move. The creator loomed over them, issuing a chilling challenge to any brave enough to face him. Following the clash with his puppet guardians, the deity declared that anyone who survived would be granted a rare privilege, to witness the rise of a new king. But before that moment could arrive, one of the hunters cried out for everyone to fall back, just as the largest statue began charging its laser. In an instant, it unleashed a devastating blast, engulfing the chamber in a searing explosion, threatening to obliterate everything. The hunters scrambled, retaliating with urgency. One channeled his magic, hurling an attack back at the massive guardian, while another distracted the deity and ordered the others to handle the smaller sentries closing in around them. One of the inspectors from the Hunter Association charged a nearby statue, smashing his weapon against its large helmet. He had expected to break it, but to his shock, there wasn't even a scratch. The hunters quickly realized that these stone guardians were unusually durable, impervious even to magical attacks. Huntress Char's attempts to provoke them yielded no reaction. They didn't budge, not even slightly. Confusion began to spread among the group as one hunter questioned whether these beings could be defeated at all. Then, out of the corner of his eye, one of them noticed Jin Woo standing completely still. Suspecting he was caught in a trance, the hunter hurled a fireball toward him. This might be their final hope. But before the fireball could reach him, the creator moved at blinding speed, intercepting the attack. With a furious expression, he screamed at the hunter, demanding to know how he dared disturb the king's slumber. Just as he was about to strike the hunter down, several of the others leapt into action, attacking the creator together. One of them shouted to Huntress Cha, urging her to wake Jin Woo while they bought her time. Understanding the urgency, she sprinted toward Jin Woo with all the speed she could muster, determined to reach him. Meanwhile, Jin Woo remained mentally trapped in another realm, where shadow beasts and dark soldiers clashed with waves of monstrous foes. Despite the relentless onslaught, the shadow army only grew stronger with each fallen enemy. If it were him fighting, Jin Woo knew his mana would have run dry by now, but this power had no limit. The dark soldiers were locked in battle with both the monstrous creatures and the silver-armored warriors, revealing an inner division among the enemy ranks. After an intense struggle, only one monster remained, their commander. The King of Darkness approached him, stating that their war had finally ended. He then asked the traitorous beast why he had turned against him. The creature responded with venom, declaring his hatred and deep desire to slay the King of Darkness. Without hesitation, the king seized him by the throat, hoisted him high, and delivered a finishing blow. When the vision faded, Jin Woo found himself in the place of the king. He looked down and saw blood covering his hands. Then he glanced at his chest. 2 hearts beat inside him, one human and one shadow, pulsing with unimaginable power. Lifting his head, he saw silver knights soaring through the skies. At that exact moment, the download of data within him reached completion. Back in the chamber, the creator faced Huntress Cha and smirked, calling her an amusing individual. He found her intriguing and decided to challenge her. She responded with her sword dance, a graceful but deadly technique. However, their fight didn't last long. With a swift strike, the creator wounded her shoulder, scoffing that this was the extent of her abilities. He voiced his disappointment, declaring her just as dull and weak as the others. From his perspective, the hunters were nothing more than pieces in a grand scenario he had designed, and none of them had the strength to stand against an immortal like himself. He began mocking their attempts, claiming he'd vastly overestimated their potential. One hunter shouted desperately to the others. They had to wake Jin Woo now, or all hope was lost. Hae-in pushed herself harder, running toward Jin Woo with everything she had, hoping the creator wouldn't notice. But he did. He turned on her, ready to strike her down, but she narrowly dodged, diving aside at the last second. She managed to escape his grasp, and though he was frustrated,
He found her reaction pleasing. But then he saw something strange, a shadow moving within her. According to the rules, no one was supposed to enter or exit this place. Yet somehow, the king had managed to plant a soldier inside her. Puzzled, the creator asked her how they had entered and what her connection to Jin Woo was. She responded calmly, saying they were friends, and she and the others had come here to rescue him. The creator, realizing they had entered of their own accord, smirked. He decided to grant them a rare mercy. Today, in this sacred chamber, a historic event was unfolding, the birth of a king.
And he would allow them to bear witness to it with their own eyes. As for the rest, he intended to kill them. But just as he was about to continue, a voice cut through the tension. It was Jin Woo speaking at last. And who decided that? As the creator turned toward the voice, he was met with a sudden, powerful blow. Jin Woo's fist slammed into his face, sending him hurtling across the chamber. The hunters, who had been watching in shock, now stared in awe. Jin Woo was finally awake. A wave of relief washed over them. Their hope had returned. Jin Woo stood firm, facing the stunned creator, who looked up at him in disbelief. It didn't make sense. Why wasn't he the chosen king? Why was Jin Woo, a human, the one standing there? Despite harboring a black heart, Jin Woo had not lost himself. He began to connect the dots, recalling the immense mana surging through him, the sign of the Demon Hunter title. With memories of vanquishing the Demon King, Baran, returning to him, he realized he'd gained recognition as a warrior of immense power. The Black Heart had granted him a staggering 100,000 mana. Jin Woo could see the panic in the creator's eyes. It was never part of his design. It seemed the heart was meant to crush him, not elevate him. Jin Woo questioned the creator's intentions, demanding to know why he opposed his rise as a player and what that truly meant. Enraged, the creator lashed out, yelling about the Shadow Monarch and questioning whether the other monarchs would ever forgive this betrayal. Jin Woo, calm but resolved, summoned countless blades from his portals, aiming them straight at the creator. He needed answers. But the creator only smirked, saying Jin Woo had surpassed every expectation. Now he understood why Jin Woo had been selected. Suddenly, the silent statues began to stir. The creator issued a grim warning. If he died, the statues wouldn't stop. Killing him wouldn't be the end. It would only unleash more chaos. Jin Woo, undeterred, replied that he planned to take care of both threats at once. The creator laughed bitterly, claiming that without him, the one who built the system, Jin Woo would revert to being an ordinary hunter. But Jin Woo smirked back, wondering aloud what would really happen if the system's architect was eliminated. The creator tried to log back into the system, but a notice appeared. System Administrator Login denied. Panic crept into his expression. Jin Woo calmly explained. Once he suspected the system was using him. It didn't feel like fate or kindness, but if he was merely a vessel for some higher design, then he'd surpass every limit they imposed. And now, seeing the cracks in that design, he'd consume the entire system. With that, Jin Woo struck, cutting the creator down before he could utter another word. The creator's dying breath was spent delivering a cryptic prophecy. Towering flames would rise, and death would follow. But Jin Woo turned away, undaunted. "Whatever comes," he said, "I'll be ready." Outside the dungeon, the association's hunters stood anxiously near the gate. It had been over an hour since the elite squad entered, and unease crept in. Entering now would likely be suicide. Just then, someone emerged, and their blood ran cold. The country's top hunters were returning in ruins. The inspectors stared, horrified by their battered condition, unable to comprehend what had happened inside. As they rushed to assist, one of them ordered others to recover the fallen. Jin Woo was the last to exit, reflecting silently. The real body of the creator, he thought, must still be out there, and the answers he sought remained elusive. As he began to walk off, the inspector called out to him, his voice weighed with sorrow. Nearly 20 hunters had died. If even one of those monsters had escaped, the cost could have been unimaginable. He asked Jin Woo if he had really faced all of that alone.
Jin Woo explained that he had informed the Bravo Guild about the double dungeon and asked them to alert the association, but he hadn't expected anyone to actually show up. So many had fallen. He tried to credit the survival to the monitoring team from the Hunters Guild, but the inspector clarified that it was their own department that had asked the guild to intervene, ultimately leading to this tragic loss. The inspector asked Jin Woo how he knew about the double dungeon opening. Jin Woo replied that the message had come directly to him, something only he could see in his mind. The inspector asked Jin Woo how he knew about the double dungeon opening. Jin Woo replied that the message had come directly to him, something only he could see in his mind. The inspector looked at him skeptically, unsure if Jin Woo was joking, especially considering how many lives had been lost. Just then, Hae-in walked up and asked if he was all right. Jin Woo said he was fine, but as he spoke, he started swaying. He mumbled something about being a bit tired and collapsed. Meanwhile, over in Japan, massive trucks were arriving near a newly opened gate, carrying a staggering 200,000 tons of magic crystals.
National-level hunter Yuri Orlov stood at the scene, watching calmly. He planned to channel the energy from the crystals into a massive barrier that would seal the gate and then absorb the leftover mana himself. But all of a sudden, something didn't feel right. The problem wasn't with the barrier, it was a presence. He could sense eyes on him. He spun around, shouting at whoever was there to show themselves. His companion looked confused, asking if Yuri was imagining things. After all, the gate wasn't scheduled to open until tomorrow, but Yuri just muttered, "I never said it was a person." Up on a nearby rooftop, a mysterious figure watched with a cold gaze. Ah, keen senses. Not surprising, given where his powers come from. But now, it finally begins. A catastrophe is coming. Back near the portal, a group of hunters questioned the presence of military forces. Modern weapons were pretty much useless against monsters. One of them said that if Yuri Orlov fell, the soldiers would at least buy the hunters some time. A girl called it pointless cannon fodder, but another hunter replied, "So are we. That's just how helpless humans are when disaster strikes." Yuri Orlov walked toward the gate, pleased by the amount of magic crystals surrounding it. If everything went smoothly, he believed he could solo clear the S-rank gate. He joked to his companion that it'd be quite the achievement, if not for that other hunter who was already more worthy of the title. He pulled a flask from his pocket and took a swig, saying he needed to ease the tension before putting on a good show. He then asked how many top-tier hunters existed worldwide. The man answered, 15. Yuri scoffed, saying that wasn't many. Then he asked where the Americans were. Weren't they supposed to send support? The man explained that it wasn't just Japan. S-rank gates had started opening in India and across the globe. Resources were stretched thin. Yuri nodded, realizing the world was facing a full-blown crisis. But suddenly, the gate behind him started to stir. And at that very moment, Jin Woo opened his eyes in a hospital bed. Jin Ho burst through the door, overwhelmed with emotion. He rushed to his mentor's side, crying and asking why he had taken so long to wake up. They thought he was dead. Jin Woo, still groggy, realized he'd been unconscious for 3 days. He felt totally drained, like his body had finally forced him to rest. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't forget what he saw in the double dungeon. Snapping out of his thoughts, he urgently asked Jin Ho what had happened. Jin Ho, confused by the question, said he didn't really understand what his master meant, but then he brought up the S-rank gate that had appeared in Japan. As soon as it opened, massive giants began pouring out, creatures so grotesque and enormous that even the top hunters were stunned. Normally, A-rank and above dungeons would have boss monsters, but this was on another level. Yuri Orlov wasn't fazed, though. He launched his attack, shouting at the giants while activating his barrier with the power of the floating magic crystals. One of the giants swung its massive axe and slammed into the barrier. Yuri laughed, taunting the creature and saying he didn't expect to see such monsters from a gate like this. He was sure his barrier would hold. But then, something terrifying happened. A monstrous hand began to push through the gate, and in a flash, a colossal giant, much larger than the rest, emerged, shoving a smaller one aside like a toy.
This giant stepped forward, and with a single strike, split Yuri's barrier in two. Yuri stood there in shock, unable to process what he'd just seen. Back in Korea, Jin Woo realized the Japanese raid had already failed. At that time, Jin Woo's father, Jin Ho's dad, was asleep at his office. He slowly woke up as one of his assistants entered and asked how long he'd been out. He replied, 23 hours and 46 minutes. Any longer, and they would have sent me to the hospital. Then he shared two pieces of news. The first was that one of the patients who had the same incurable disease as Jin Woo's mother had awakened. It was beyond belief. No one thought such an illness could be cured. The second piece of news was about visitors, and just then, a girl entered the office looking surprised. She asked him directly, "Wait, you were sick too?"
A towering titan seized Hunter Yuri Orlov and swallowed him whole. Despite the heavy artillery and tanks relentlessly firing at the giants pouring out of the gate, their attacks were completely ineffective. These colossal beings were simply too strong. No missile or cannon could scratch them. Hunters on the battlefield began urging civilians to understand. Conventional weapons were useless against magical creatures like these. Jin Woo then stepped forward and began giving orders to the hunters around him, commanding them to confront the giants coming through the portal. Together, they launched an attack on one of the towering monsters. A female hunter wielding a katana soared through the air, aiming to blind the giant, but the creature noticed them and responded with a violent swing of its massive axe. The hunters quickly realized that despite the giant's enormous frame, it was shockingly fast and incredibly powerful. From high above in a news helicopter, reporters broadcasted the chaos unfolding across Tokyo, describing the horrific scene playing out below. Jin Woo, watching from his living room, felt as if the world had descended into a living nightmare. The entire planet watched with bated breath, anxious to see how this life-or-death struggle would play out. If the hunters failed, this tragedy could mirror the Jeju Island incident, and this time, the consequences might engulf all of Asia. As Jin Woo debated whether to intervene, his sister's voice rang out from behind the door, begging him not to go. He asked her again, did she really want him to stay? She began to answer, already assuming he'd leave anyway. What she didn't expect was his calm response, saying he had no intention of going anywhere for now. Too much had happened, and he needed time to rest. As he walked past her, he gently patted her head and reassured her not to worry. Later, Jin Woo sat on a bench in a park nearby and summoned his shadow. He started reminiscing, mentioning how he'd been watching old Korean dramas while taking care of Jinna. Maybe he shouldn't admit that, but it was probably obvious anyway. When he asked how his sister was doing, the reply was brief. She was asleep in bed, like usual. He realized that the earlier traumatic incident had left a deep scar on her. Even after all these years, she hadn't moved on. Jin Woo still didn't know what to do for her. Just then, a car approached, and moments later, he found himself sitting in a corporate office. There, Jin Ho's father introduced himself as Yu, chairman of the Yugen Construction Company. Yu handed Jin Woo a check, clarifying that he didn't believe money could buy everything, especially not someone like Jin Woo, a top-ranked hunter. His intentions, he claimed, were sincere. Jin Woo understood that this discussion was meant to remain private. Judging by Yu's demeanor, it didn't seem like he was trying to recruit Jin Woo into his guild. When asked what Yu needed, the chairman revealed that he had the same terminal illness that once plagued Jin Woo's mother. Jin Woo asked if Jin Ho knew, but Yu admitted only 3 people were aware, his wife, doctor, and secretary. Now, Jin Woo was the 4th. Yu explained that while searching for a cure, someone had been successfully healed of the disease. Coincidentally, or maybe miraculously, that person was Jin Woo's mother. Now, Yu needed help. He promised to never forget Jin Woo's kindness, if he agreed. Jin Woo felt a weight in his chest. The battle in Japan was raging, and reporters in helicopters were filming the city being torn apart. Gigantic beasts destroyed buildings, ripped trees from the ground, and devoured people. It was as if they were bent on erasing humanity itself. One giant, in particular, stood guard at the gate. Unlike the others, it didn't attack mindlessly. It seemed to be protecting something.
or someone. A cameraman noted that the giant, while clearly breathing and moving, felt unnatural, almost like it had been programmed with a specific task. A passenger in the helicopter responded, saying that if defeating it were so simple, ordinary weapons would have worked by now. Out of 30 monsters, only 2 had been taken down. The reporters wondered how long they'd been outside. The operator monitoring time said it had been 2 days. The city was crumbling into ruins, and there was no telling how long the defense could hold. Back in Korea, Jin Woo spoke with Jin Ho in his office, saying he planned to go to Japan. Jin Ho strongly objected, saying the news from there was worse than anything they'd seen before, even worse than the chaos on Shenzhou Island. Jin Ho pointed out that they had never faced monsters of this magnitude before, but Jin Woo acknowledged the risk and said that if they succeeded, their guild's name would rise in fame. As he looked at Jin Ho, he sensed even his closest ally was starting to doubt him. The situation was dire. Yet, Jin Ho suddenly had a change of heart.
He raised his arms, showed a photo, and broke into tears, saying he wasn't here just to fix mistakes. He wanted to stand by his mentor, no matter what. Jin Woo was stunned to hear such emotional words from someone like Jin Ho. The young hunter insisted on joining him, begging to be taken along. Though moments ago he had tried to talk Jin Woo out of it, he now seemed determined. Jin Woo asked if he was serious, and Jin Ho, with unwavering resolve, confirmed that he trusted Jin Woo's judgment completely. As Jin Woo stood up to leave, he joked that he didn't care about Japan anyway. It was time to call it a day. They had done enough for now. But once outside, Jin Woo reflected on something troubling. He couldn't summon his shadow army yet, and whoever had created this disaster was likely just as powerful as he was, perhaps even stronger. There were still beings in the world who could rival his strength. The world was vast, and it was time to accept that he couldn't fix everything alone. He wasn't some superhero. When he returned home, he greeted his mother, who was glad to see him, and invited him to dinner. At the table, he asked about his sister. His mother explained she had no appetite and was resting. As they ate, Jin Woo thought back to his conversation with Jin Ho's father. When he had declined to help, Yu had pleaded for at least some information about how his mother was cured. Jin Woo said that if he knew, he would have already used that knowledge to help others, or even profit from it. As Jin Woo left the building and descended in the elevator, he kept thinking about Yu. Something felt off. Was he really ill? Or was there another agenda? The sacred water of life was limited. He had to be cautious. The request had caught him off guard, but it didn't interest him. And so, he made his decision. Turning to his mother, he said he would be right back. He had accepted that there were others out there stronger than him, but that wasn't a reason to stop. He needed to go and fight. His mother, while washing dishes, remarked that his father had once run to respond to an emergency call even in the middle of dinner. She offered to help him prepare. Upstairs, his sister overheard everything. Silent tears streamed down her face as she curled under a blanket. Jin Woo entered her room and asked if she was asleep. She nodded. He asked if they could talk, but she declined, saying she was tired. He sat beside her anyway, unsure how to begin. He started by mentioning that he had nearly died recently, but quickly realized it was the wrong approach. He clarified that while danger was common for him, this time was different. Still, he was thankful to be alive and to have returned home. He promised her that he would come back again. As he gently touched her head, he expressed gratitude for her love, her concern, and her wish for him to stay. But his sister couldn't hold back anymore and broke into tears, crying that he was going to leave anyway. Jin Woo calmly promised that wherever he went, he'd always look after her. She had nothing to fear. The next day, a press conference was held by the association's president, with cameras capturing every moment. When Jin Woo made his appearance and spoke his mind, the room buzzed with tension. He and the president shook hands before departing. A few hours later, at the airport, Jin Ho arrived carrying a bulky bag of gear. He saw Jin Woo waiting, scratching his head.
Apparently, their partner was running late. Soon after, Jin Ho and the Ujin Guild boarded their flight, eager to make their mark. Meanwhile, in Japan, soldiers scrambled to evacuate civilians. One soldier explained to a doctor that they could only save a few of the wounded, 3 or 4 at most. The doctor was stunned. 10 patients still needed help and couldn't move on their own. The soldier responded that now wasn't the time for sentiment. Death was everywhere, and they had to prioritize survival. But the doctor refused to abandon them. Inspired, the soldier decided to stay too. He vowed to get everyone to safety somehow. Suddenly, giants rounded the corner and began devouring soldiers. Bullets did nothing to stop them. Just as one soldier tried to drag the doctor away, a colossal shadow struck a giant with immense force, sending it flying and crushing buildings in its wake. Stunned, the soldier looked up to see a giant shadow warrior, equal in size to the monsters. Then, a man walked past him.
The stranger warned that the area was dangerous and suggested luring the remaining giant away from the hospital. Debris from a collapsing building rained down, threatening civilians. Just in time, Jin Ho raised his massive shield and protected everyone, urging calm and focusing on the evacuation. He told Jin Woo he'd handle the defense while Jin Woo took on the remaining monsters. With a nod, Jin Woo commanded his shadow army to strike. His towering shadow soldier struck down another giant. Jin Woo leapt into action, bounding onto the soldier's back, jumping even higher, and cleaving a giant in half with a single slash. Meanwhile, hunters in the eastern United States discussed the news of Jin Woo's arrival in Japan. Some doubted he'd survive. They pointed out that unlike them, who were powered up by a powerful benefactor, Jin Woo fought alone. They debated his chances, with one claiming Jin Woo's arrogance would lead to his end. Others even bet on how long he would last. The leader of the Seekers Guild, however, confidently wagered all their guild buildings on Jin Woo's safe return. Japan, chaos reigned as the battle raged on. Shadow soldiers clashed with towering giants in the heart of the city, while news helicopters hovered above, capturing the surreal confrontation to prove it wasn't a dream. Renowned hunter Jin Woo launched an attack on one of the massive creatures. Quickly, his army of ant shadows overwhelmed the beast, tearing it apart, piece by piece. Down below, a young girl fled in terror from an approaching giant, its massive hand reaching out. Suddenly, a dark figure swooped in, slicing through the giant's hand. It was Igris, Jin Woo's loyal knight. He caught the girl and held her safely in his arms. Just then, another shadow descended. Iron. With an aerial strike, he slammed his axe into the giant's head, bringing it crashing down. The girl remained in Igris's grasp, staring in awe and fear. Igris gently patted her head, offering silent comfort. Nearby, Jin Woo observed the fight with a nod of satisfaction, proud to see Iron thriving after his recent upgrades. A soldier approached to express his gratitude, but Jin Woo, unable to speak English, simply pointed to his ring and said, "You good, brave man." Though puzzled, the soldier smiled and responded with a heartfelt, "Thank you." Jin Woo then turned to Jin Ho, asking him to escort the man to safety and ensure the evacuation was completed. Once Jin Ho understood, he led the soldier away. With civilians clearing out, Jin Woo knew it was time to push further. He raised the fallen giant as a shadow, adding to his growing army. Elsewhere, a team reported the giant's body to their chairman, who immediately checked surveillance footage. Recognizing Jin Woo's piercing gaze, a memory of their airport meeting flashed through his mind. The chairman reached out to speak directly with Jin Woo, urgently explaining that more giants were en route to Osaka and they needed help. Jin Woo declined the request. Perplexed, the chairman asked what he planned instead. But as he looked into Jin Woo's unwavering expression, he began to realize Jin Woo wasn't just fighting for support. He was going to take them all on, alone. This revelation hit hard. Maybe this had been Jin Woo's plan from the start. Jin Woo faced the towering new shadow giant he had just raised. Gazing into its eyes, he began numbering his enemies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just then, Beru arrived and reported another enemy had been eliminated, proudly requesting the title of number 6. Jin Woo, now focused on strategy, began organizing his army with purpose. He turned to Jin Ho near a field tent and told him to stand by. This was only the beginning.
His shadow army, spread across Japan, supported local hunters in suppressing the giants. With the monsters already worn down and disorganized, Jin Woo's forces faced little resistance, but a new concern surfaced. The appearance of this high-level dungeon suggested worse outbreaks were coming. Other monstrous threats were already infesting the city. Both evacuation and defense had to happen simultaneously. On the 7th night after the dungeon's eruption, Jin Woo and Jin Ho wandered the shattered streets. Amid the ruins, they encountered a female hunter who asked if they'd finally arrived. Jin Woo, puzzled, asked why no other hunters were around. She explained Tokyo had been reduced to ruins. The damage was so severe it couldn't even be measured. Monsters had scattered across the country. Only 17 ranked hunters remained. 6 Japanese, 2 Chinese, 3 Canadians, 1 each from India and the UK. 2 teams of 6 had formed, but among the casualties were Yuri Orlov, Hanzawa Go, Fear, and Lucas from Canada. The monsters weren't just numerous, they were strong. Each one rivaled or surpassed an A-rank dungeon boss. If even 3 top-tier hunters had fallen, Jin Woo knew lesser-ranked hunters stood no chance. There had been 13 giants. One of them was now making its way to China by sea. The huntress added that while they couldn't clear Japan entirely, Jin Woo had decimated most of the giants. The final one was being handled by the remaining hunters and his shadow army. Jin Woo noted that only one remained, the guardian of the gate. But his attention was drawn to the burning skyline. A strange feeling overcame him. He'd seen something like this before. No fire then, just the same shattered city. A hellish domain. Could this all be orchestrated by the system? What message had its creator tried to leave behind? But the creator was long gone.
Jin Woo wasn't even sure if his body was real anymore. Still, it didn't matter. He had to stop this future from happening. That was the reason for his power. He wouldn't back down from a challenge. That's what brought him here. As his thoughts settled, he addressed the others. Everyone had gathered. The huntress objected. Other hunters were still fighting. But Jin Woo told her, no, it was over. And he was right. The other hunters, sprawled across the battlefield, were catching their breath. A female hunter, exhausted and frustrated, slammed her fist on the fallen giant. She couldn't hide her anger. Her partner tried to console her, suggesting she look on the bright side. After all, they'd beaten foes they couldn't even touch before. The battle was over. Tokyo was in ruins, but they'd survived. Still, the girl vented, saying they were just cleanup crew now, while shadow soldiers flooded the streets. Meanwhile, Jin Woo's shadow army gathered for the next stage. The huntress beside him noticed more shadows appearing, poised to strike. From above, Beru soared in and landed at Jin Woo's side. Jin Woo welcomed him and praised his efforts. Beru bowed and thanked his king. Turning to Jin Ho, Jin Woo told him and Miss Hanakawa to retreat to a safe distance. As they cleared the area, Jin Woo faced the 6 remaining giants. With a command, he launched his army into action. A mighty roar echoed as the shadows surged forward toward the gate, and the last, most formidable giant. Jin Woo's army was so immense, half the city darkened under their presence. The massive giant, dormant until now, opened his blazing red eyes. Spotting the approaching horde, he rose. Swinging his colossal blade, he wiped out hundreds of shadows in one blow. Then he charged, flinging enemies back by the thousands. Jin Woo watched in alarm. The giant's raw strength was overwhelming. With every swing, he decimated wave after wave. Jin Woo's first instinct was to retreat. The power he faced was unimaginable. There were only 2 options: escape and move on, or eliminate him now. He had no intention of backing down. Even as the ants near the giant's feet began swarming him, he lifted his foot, sending them flying. Beru stood ready to charge, but Jin Woo held him back. It wasn't time yet. He needed to conserve mana and find a weakness. As Jin Woo's forces fought valiantly, his mana drained at an alarming rate. The giant's aura was like an impenetrable fortress. That was his strength. Jin Woo finally understood. This monster wasn't relying on defense.
He didn't need to, and still, the fight had only just begun. At that moment, Jin Woo gave the signal, prompting his dragon to take flight. They soared high into the sky, heading straight for the towering giant. As they neared the enemy, Jin Woo commanded one of his generals to advance and await further instructions. But just as they closed the gap, Beru misinterpreted the command and lunged at the giant prematurely. Simultaneously, Iris, riding atop the dragon Kaisal, ascended even higher into the air. He lifted his sword, summoning a fierce bolt of lightning to strike the giant, but the behemoth narrowly managed to deflect the blow. Without hesitation, Jin Woo launched himself off of Quell, charging headfirst toward the enemy. Ygritte, still determined, didn't back down either. Having his previous attacks dodged had clearly provoked him. He vaulted toward the giant, who retaliated by swinging his enormous blade. But Ygritte had already scaled the Titan's body, closing the distance with nimble speed. Furious, the giant called down a bolt of lightning, aiming directly at his face, but Ygritte shielded himself, blocking the blast with his massive hand. That's when Jin Woo suddenly appeared, stabbing straight into the giant's eye. In a flash, he launched a flurry of savage attacks aimed at the giant's head. From a distance, Jin Ho looked on in awe. It didn't resemble a battle between a hunter and a monster. This was a clash of titans. Jin Woo's overwhelming speed and strength left the giant reeling. Then, channeling chaos energy into his blade, Jin Woo struck with such force that he completely destroyed the giant's right eye. In that exact moment, he ordered Beru forward. Beru surged through the air, piercing straight into the giant's remaining eye. The giant shrieked, staggering backward in pain. He hadn't anticipated this kind of assault. With the Chaos Blade's power flaring and Jin Woo and his general attacking in unison, they delivered the final devastating blows. The towering enemy collapsed, the ground trembling as his massive form hit the earth.
As the giant fell, a system message indicated Jin Woo had leveled up once more. He stood on a rooftop, taking in the scene of his hard-earned victory. But something felt off. Doubt crept in. Jin Ho ran up, congratulating him on the triumph. But Jin Woo remained alert. The system hadn't confirmed the defeat of the dungeon's final boss. That ominous dark energy was still lingering, and none of the giant's shadows could be extracted. Jin Woo realized this raid wasn't finished. As Jin Ho approached, Jin Woo raised his hand, stopping him. He sensed danger still loomed. Just then, Beru emerged from the fallen giant's body and addressed him. Jin Woo already knew. The giant was dead. Its magic had become faint, hard to detect. Suddenly, the gate in front of them began to shift, its shape twisting unnaturally. A massive surge of magic burst forth. Jin Woo turned to look and saw Ygritte already shielding him in darkness. The gate absorbed the energy, and Jin Woo stood frozen in awe. He ordered Jin Ho to stay behind, then leapt into the gate alone. On the other side, Jin Woo found himself in a strange and colossal castle clearly built for giants. The space stretched endlessly, cold and unfamiliar. Beru suddenly spoke, sensing something nearby, an eerie laugh echoing down the hallway. Jin Woo was puzzled. Why would there be someone else in a dungeon like this? Still, the laughter, though unsettling, sparked his curiosity. He moved toward the source, entering a grand corridor. At the end, a massive figure awaited him, a giant, bound in chains, laughing with such intensity it sounded painful. The giant spoke cryptically, mentioning prophecies, the rulers, and visitors who had come before. Jin Woo was confused. He didn't recognize this being. The chained giant pleaded with Jin Woo to set him free, saying he had vital information about the monarchs and needed to warn the rulers. But as the giant looked up and saw Jin Woo's unfamiliar face, his expression shifted to fury. Jin Woo demanded answers. Who were the monarchs, and why had they imprisoned this giant? With a grim tone, the giant declared the monarchs as ancient enemies of the rulers. Jin Woo realized something critical. If the monarchs opposed the rulers, then they were also his enemies. He asked if that was why the giant was chained here. The giant confirmed it. He admitted he was also a monarch, and said the rulers and monarchs were likely already on their way to confront him.
He no longer had the strength to fight them all, but claimed he needed more power. Jin Woo didn't understand what kind of power the giant meant. The giant begged Jin Woo to free him, swearing he would aid him. Jin Woo raised an eyebrow. "Who's helping who here?" he asked, suspicious. He demanded proof. The giant simply smiled and said, "I'll make you believe." At that moment, a notification window appeared. It revealed that the King of Giants, the Monarch, had used a skill called Oath of Loyalty. This skill would bind them in truth. Neither side could lie. Jin Woo agreed to the oath without hesitation. The pact was sealed. Now, trusting the bond, Jin Woo began questioning the giant further. He asked why he could speak so freely, unlike other magical creatures. The monarch was puzzled, not understanding what Jin Woo meant by monsters. Jin Woo clarified he meant the beings that poured out of the gates. The monarch assumed he was referring to the chaos creatures. He explained they were remnants of defeated armies or soldiers captured by the rulers. Over time, they had become twisted by magic. He claimed he was different, a king who had preserved his mind through countless years, waiting to meet Jin Woo. This surprised Jin Woo. He thought of the white-armored, winged beings, the ruler's army. The monarch confirmed that those were indeed the ruler's forces. When Jin Woo asked why they were sending monsters through the gates, the monarch revealed their plan. They were saturating Earth with magic in preparation for war. Monsters and chaos were just tools to spread magical energy across the planet. The monarch explained further. Soul crystals and mana stones, byproducts of this magic, were powerful energy sources. The rulers aimed to use bloodshed to enrich Earth's magical density, turning it into a battlefield for their war with the monarchs. Jin Woo was shaken. This was the second great war between monarchs and rulers. Earth was simply their battleground. The monarch warned him. Now that he'd made contact with both sides, neither would leave him alone. Their agents had likely already begun to move. Jin Woo pressed further, asking why he was a target. The monarch explained. Jin Woo's power wasn't originally his. It was evidence that its original wielder had betrayed the rulers and joined the monarchs. The monarch then pledged his loyalty again, offering his strength if Jin Woo would free him.
But Jin Woo wasn't so quick to trust. He usually turned allies into shadows, but the monarch explained that beings like him couldn't be transformed that way. Their essence lingered after death. Still, he could become an ally by choice. Jin Woo remained cautious. As he moved to cut the chains, he noticed a faint glow from a stone embedded in the giant's neck. Then, a sinister voice whispered from within, telling him to kill humans. In an instant, the monarch's demeanor changed. He lashed out at Jin Woo. Sensing betrayal, Jin Woo leaped back and declared, "Let's pretend this deal never happened." He launched an attack, plunging his blade deep into the monarch's body. The monarch shouted that Jin Woo was making a mistake, but Jin Woo ignored him, dodging and countering with brutal strikes. The battle raged until the monarch fell, weakened and defeated. Before collapsing, the monarch gave a final warning. If this war wasn't stopped, Earth would burn. Jin Woo responded coldly, "I won't let that happen." With one final blow, he vanquished the monarch, the dungeon boss, and one of the 9 monarchs. Jin Woo stood over the fallen enemy, knowing there was more to come. Though he couldn't extract the monarch's shadow, he took an unfamiliar artifact from the body, deciding it would serve as a reminder of the storm that lay ahead. Just as he suspected, a helicopter descended onto the grounds of a lavish estate. 2 individuals stepped out and were soon welcomed by none other than Christopher Reed, a hunter ranked at the national level. He greeted them with a hint of surprise, admitting he hadn't been informed of any visitors. But upon recognizing them as the deputy and Miss Selner, he nodded politely as they requested a private conversation. They asked if he could have everyone else clear out of the house. Without protest, Christopher gave a firm order to his staff. No one was to approach the room until the guests had left. A short time later, the trio settled into a room where Christopher immediately got to the point. "If this is about another dungeon emerging in the east," he said bluntly, "I'll save you the trouble." "I'm not going." Selner gently shook her head.
That's not the reason we're here. This is something far more serious. Christopher raised an eyebrow. More serious than a level 9 dungeon? There was a pause before Selner said quietly, "There's a high chance someone will try to kill you soon." At her words, Christopher carefully set his coffee cup down, his voice still calm, but laced with steel. "I appreciate the concern, but we're not close enough for these kinds of jokes." His tone began to shift as irritation crept in. "Kill me? Who's going to pull that off?" Selner hurried to explain. "I had a vision, a dream. You were surrounded by dark figures, and then you were killed." Christopher's face darkened with disbelief. "You flew all the way here to tell me a fairy tale, based on a dream?" His voice rose with anger. "Cut the crap! I know what you're really doing." His frustration boiled over. "You've been spreading rumors about me, about what I can do. Just because you're some kind of psychic doesn't mean you get to play games with people's lives. I'm not just any hunter. I'm a national level one. No one can take me down." Still, Selner held her ground. "I saw it, as clearly as I see you now." Christopher leaned in, smirking with sarcasm. "Okay, let's say I believe you. Then what? Ask someone to guard me? There's no one on this planet who can protect me better than I protect myself. So what's the point of this?" Selner didn't hesitate this time. "There is someone." Christopher narrowed his eyes. "Who?" She replied, "Hunter Sung Jin Woo."
Kicks off with a tense moment aboard a plane. Adam urgently yells, "Wait, let me explain." Desperation in his voice, he begins describing the creature in the photo, not just any monster, but one that emerged from a dungeon and launched an immediate assault on the hunters. He reminded Jin Woo of a massive explosion that had shaken the world a few months ago. That was the result of this very being. Jin Woo released his grip, letting Adam slump to the floor. Still catching his breath, Adam continued. After the incident, the Bureau kept tabs on the entity, but it vanished, almost as if the earth had swallowed it. Jin Woo took this all in, mentally connecting the dots. "Then why show me this now?" he asked. Adam revealed the Bureau's intentions to make a public announcement at the upcoming International Guild Summit. The plan was to declare Jin Woo a fugitive, effectively ending the classified status of their investigation. As Jin Woo examined the photos, it became clear the U.S. had lost one of their most powerful hunters, Christopher Reed. It was no surprise they were going all out to catch whoever was responsible. Adam added quietly, "The Bureau still values its ties with you, Jin Woo." "That's why I'm giving you this heads up," Adam confessed. "It would be a disgrace for you to see your father's image pinned as the prime suspect at the summit." Jin Woo froze in place. "My father? After disappearing for over a decade, he returned as a monster?" The realization was earth-shattering. At that point, guards approached Adam, asking if he was feeling okay. Adam waved them off, claiming mild fatigue. In truth, he was shaken by Jin Woo's telekinetic control. This wasn't your average mage's trick. It was on par with abilities reserved for national-level hunters. Adam knew he had to inform his superiors immediately. Days passed, and the roster for the International Guild Conference was released. Surprisingly, South Korea's chosen representative was the Hae-in Guild, consisting solely of Jin Woo. This decision ignited debates across the globe, but the argument stood. Jin Woo's strength rivaled entire guilds. That alone justified the choice. The summit buzzed with questions about Hae-in Guild's inclusion. When asked, Choi Jong-in responded with certainty, "It's not only a fair decision, I stand by it completely. Jin Woo is more than capable of representing Korea." A reporter questioned whether it was shameful that Hae-in Guild had just one member. Choi answered bluntly, "That one person is Sung Jin Woo. That should say it all. During the Jeju Island raid, I saw his power with my own eyes." "Jin Woo alone can take the place of 100 hunters," Choi declared. "Hae-in Guild lacks nothing compared to others worldwide." But another guild member stood up to protest. "For years, the Hunter Guild carried our flag at this event. This sudden switch feels wrong," he said.
Choi admitted. Sure, I'm disappointed. I even renewed my passport for this trip, but Jin Woo's accomplishments outweigh personal pride. He faced the Ant King when no one else could. Thanks to him, we all made it back alive. I'm honored that he's our representative. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, another guild leader commented on the Ajin Guild's silence. It's been 4 days since Jin Woo returned from Japan, yet he hasn't tackled any new dungeons. This quiet is unsettling. One of his subordinates noted that with Ajin inactive, their own business had surged by 40%. The guildmaster dismissed the celebration, calling it premature. You're just monkeys dancing over free fruit, he said. Jin Woo won't stay hidden. Someone like him doesn't vanish without reason. Elsewhere, in the Hunter Association's headquarters, the president received an update. China had made an inquiry about Jin Woo. The president was displeased. That's private information, he said. The inspector clarified, it's not an official request. It came personally from Lu Jigang, China's renowned 7-star hunter. Likely intrigued after the battle against the giants, Lu wanted to know more about Jin Woo. The president declined. Send a generic response. There's no obligation to disclose personal data. Meanwhile, in the U.S., at a top-tier guild facility, a girl briefed her superior about Jin Woo's upcoming arrival. Moments later, a man walked in. You called, sir? Thomas nodded. Perfect timing. Let me be direct. Don't provoke Sung Jin Woo, Huang. Caught off guard, Huang was visibly shaken.
Thomas continued, I know about what happened between you and your brother regarding Jin Woo. I'm sure you're curious, but... Suddenly, Thomas unleashed his aura and pointed at him. I don't recall giving you permission to speak. Huang was paralyzed with fear. A nearby observer thought to herself, he can intimidate a high-ranking hunter like that. Incredible. But she also knew that Huang Dong-su was just as relentless as Thomas when it came to tracking his prey. Thomas repeated, I'm serious. Stay away from Jin Woo. Go relax at the guild villa during the summit or something. What do you say? Will you honor this request, Mr. Huang? There was silence. Then a quiet, all right. Thomas nodded, satisfied. You're dismissed. As Huang walked away, Thomas's assistant asked, Do you think he'll obey? Thomas shook his head. Number, keep eyes on him until Sung Jin Woo leaves the country, Laura. The next day, as the summit commenced, guilds from across the globe assembled. A representative from Germany noticed the swarm of reporters. They're all here for the Korean hunter, Sung Jin Woo, his assistant explained. As Raw prepared to greet Jin Woo, he stopped mid-step. His body froze. His aide asked why, and Raw muttered, That aura. It's unreal. Jin Woo, feeling the stares, turned to Jin Ho. Do you recognize anyone? Jin Ho looked around. No, but someone's really eyeing you. He added, You've been all over the news. He probably wants an autograph. Then Jin Ho noticed someone unexpected, the head of the Hunter Association. With a straight face, the man admitted he'd been assigned to protect Jin Woo, though he looked sheepish, saying it aloud. Jin Ho asked him to repeat that. To guard him, he confirmed. Jin Woo raised an eyebrow. I thought you were leading the Bureau's Asia branch, Mr. White. The man nodded. I was, until recently. Now, I'm also your point of contact. Adam then instructed that everyone but Jin Woo would be escorted to the hotel. He asked if they could speak privately. Jin Woo, deadly serious, asked if this was about his father. Adam assured him the discussion wouldn't harm him. In fact, he said, you've got allies here in the States, but what we'll be discussing is top secret, some of it classified as Level 1. Later, as they sat in a car, Jin Woo asked where they were headed. Adam replied, To the Central Bureau building. Time is of the essence now. Christopher is dead, and we urgently need to reinforce America's hunter forces. Although details about Christopher Reed's death weren't officially disclosed, the U.S. was now putting all their resources into finding a suitable replacement as quickly as possible. Jin Woo asked if he was being considered for that role.
Adam, pulling out some documents, began explaining. He said that Christopher's power was on par with a magical beast of massive proportions. The artifact he possessed, the dragon's runestone, was such a cataclysmic force that it marked a dark chapter in human history one most would prefer to forget. That very runestone, pulled from a creature of legends, created an insatiable drive to find someone worthy of wielding it. Adam then asked Jin Woo for his opinion on their proposal, but Jin Woo was more interested in the first image he saw. He requested Adam to zoom in, examining the picture closely. He noticed something unsettling in the photo of Reed's body. Jin Woo was stunned. America had managed to preserve the corpse of the dragon. Adam confirmed it was true, but Jin Woo pressed further, demanding to know the location of the preserved remains. He made it clear that after sharing so much of his time, the least they could do was grant him that. Adam responded that even he didn't have access to that kind of classified intel, but he suspected that if he escalated the request, the higher-ups might approve it. Jin Woo agreed to wait, on the condition that he do so with Adam at the bureau. Once they arrived at the building, Adam made his way to inform the higher officials that Jin Woo was requesting access to the dragon's body. The senior officer noted that such a decision had to come directly from the deputy head. As Adam stepped out, the officials inside began to discuss amongst themselves. One asked, "Why would he want to see Reed's corpse?" The other replied, "I'm not sure, but one thing's obvious. This guy isn't just sightseeing." They considered the implications. A hunter of Jin Woo's level would never hesitate to spend whatever it took to obtain powerful runes or relics. These weren't just tools. They were literal lifelines in battle. But gaining access to Reed's body could offer something even greater than a new skill. A chance at an elite shadow soldier. Another voiced concern. Wasn't Jin Woo's ability limited to monsters he personally defeated? But then the thought struck them. What if he could resurrect even those he didn't kill? Could he raise Kamish, a being long dead?
If that was possible, it would give Jin Woo unprecedented power. One of them argued they should deny the request outright. No single individual should be allowed to amass that kind of strength. The other disagreed, warning that a refusal could damage diplomatic ties. Eventually, they decided to permit it, but only under personal supervision. After all, this could be a rare opportunity to observe Jin Woo's abilities in action. Soon, they were walking through the heavily secured floors. The official guiding them silently wished the atmosphere was less tense. Jin Woo, meanwhile, was amazed they'd constructed a facility right on the very spot Reed had died. As they moved through a corridor, the escort input a passcode at a reinforced door. Jin Woo immediately felt it, the lingering aura of intense magical energy. Once inside, Jin Woo was struck by the sheer magnitude of the remains. A colossal dragon skeleton lay before them. The official explained, "This is Kamish. It took 5 national-level hunters to bring him down. The entire facility's power grid is fueled by the runestone we extracted from him." He turned to Jin Woo. "Are you satisfied?" Jin Woo simply said, "Step back." With that, he moved toward the remains. The observers watched nervously. Jin Woo began murmuring the shadow extraction chant. A dark mist started swirling, but his first attempt failed. He took a deep breath and tried again. Still nothing. With just one chance left, Jin Woo focused all his strength and commanded, "Arise!" Suddenly, the entire room began to shake. A massive surge of shadow energy erupted. The dragon began to take form, releasing an earth-shaking roar that rattled the very foundation of the building. Panic ensued. The defense systems began to falter. The beast's breath attack was imminent. The escorts screamed to retreat. But Jin Woo calmly reassured them. The runestone was removed long ago. It no longer obeys the monarch's will. Even more astonishing was that Jin Woo was speaking in the language of magical creatures. One of the men whispered in disbelief. He couldn't comprehend what was unfolding. Then the dragon looked at Jin Woo and spoke. "You, King of the Dead, Lord of Shadows, you summon me, not these lesser beings." The officials stood frozen. The dragon's voice thundered once again. "I serve the Dragon King, the sovereign of destruction." Hearing this,
Jin Woo was overtaken by rage. This beast was far stronger than any foe he'd fought before. Its presence alone was overwhelming. And then, the mighty dragon wagged its tail playfully, like a pet greeting its master. Jin Woo realized something in that moment. This wasn't just any creature. He was now dealing with one of the 9 rulers that the system had mentioned. Kamish had once served a sovereign. But their encounter wouldn't last. Kamish began to dissolve, its form flickering. The connection had come too late. 8 years was too long, even for the Shadow Monarch's power. Before fading, Kamish left a warning. 4 beings walk among you, empowered by monarchs. Be cautious. The system confirmed. Shadow extraction failed. No further attempts would work. Jin Woo turned to Adam. He apologized and offered to cover the cost of repairs. As they left, Jin Woo, overwhelmed with frustration, punched the wall, denting it effortlessly. That night, an inspector from the Korean Hunter Association approached him. "Why haven't you been answering your phone?" the man asked. "I was in an area with no reception," Jin Woo replied. The inspector informed him that Jin Ho had been trying to reach him and was waiting at the bureau. Jin Woo explained that he'd just returned and had no idea what it was about. Just then, Adam joined them, saying, "Jin Ho wasn't even on the approved guest list." The inspector looked confused. "That can't be. A Vultures Guild member came earlier claiming they'd escort him. Even though the Vultures had a good relationship with the Bureau, they had no authority to act on its behalf." The inspector decided to get in touch with them directly. Meanwhile, Jin Woo's instincts began screaming. Something was off. At the Vulture's office, a girl answered the call, and her face went pale. Someone from their guild had used Ajin's name, and she knew exactly who it was. The inspector spoke on the phone, asked if Jin Woo was aware of anything, to which Jin Woo responded he knew nothing. The girl assured the inspector she would find out quickly. Shortly after, the inspector relayed that the Vulture had confirmed they would investigate, but when he looked again, Jin Woo had already disappeared. Jin Woo raced to the tallest building in the city, realizing his mistake in not securing Jin Ho's location. Using Shadow Exchange, he swore to safeguard Jin Ho. If anything happened to him, it would remind him of his sister's fate.
Summoning his shadow soldiers, he issued an order for them to scour the city for Jin Ho. The soldiers scattered in all directions. Meanwhile, inside a room, the leader of the Scavenger Guild watched as his subordinates fled. He removed his glasses, realizing the grave mistake he had made, blaming the actions of that damned Huang Dong-su. He instructed his men to find Jin Ho before Jin Woo could reach him. It was imperative that they find him first. As night fell, Jin Woo stood high above, watching his shadow soldiers fan out across the city. He considered the possibility that Jin Ho had been taken outside the city. However, considering Jin Ho's high rank, regular people would have difficulty overpowering him in a crowd. If he had been taken in a different direction, the Hunter Bureau would have acted immediately. More importantly, Jin Woo deduced the kidnapper had left a trail. The Scavenger Guild. If the perpetrator was connected to the Scavenger Guild, it had to be Huang Dong-su's younger brother. Jin Woo vowed to trap the guild upon their return to America. After all, he and Jin Ho were the sole survivors of that disastrous raid. He suspected that Huang Dong-su harbored a grudge for the death of his comrade. Jin Woo had no regrets about his actions at the time, but if anything happened to Jin Ho, he would destroy everyone involved. At the Scavenger Guild, the leader sat in his chair, asking his subordinates if they had located Huang Dong-su. When they reported no success, the leader realized his mistake. Despite Huang being an S-rank hunter, the guild leader knew he was no match for Jin Woo. Since Huang left, the leader had known he would interfere. Realizing he had been too lenient with his hunters, he called his assistant, Laura, asking for an update. Laura informed him that thanks to the Bureau's intelligence, they had tracked Huang Dong-su's movements over the past month. It seemed he had visited a certain location 3 times, even though it wasn't on his schedule. The guild leader instructed Laura to send all available members to that location immediately, adding that he would go himself.
He also asked how Laura had convinced the Bureau to cooperate and emphasized the urgency of finding Huang quickly. "There's a high chance we'll encounter Hunter Jin Woo," he warned. At the Bureau, alarms blared as staff rushed in, shouting that all the Scavenger Guild members had suddenly mobilized, 100 of them. They had cancelled their raid and were heading to one location. This unusual movement confirmed that Thomas Andre, the Scavenger Guild leader, was involved. But at that very moment, in an abandoned room, 3 Scavenger Guild hunters stood over a bleeding Jin Ho. One of them remarked that they weren't going to kill him, but needed to extract some information. Thomas had initially ordered them not to touch Jin Woo, but now he realized there was another person who could provide the answers. If Jin Ho didn't lie about what happened in the dungeon, he would be set free. Huang Dong-su only wanted one thing, to hear that Jin Woo had killed his brother. Once that was confirmed, he wouldn't need Jin Ho anymore. At that moment, Huang leaned over and slapped Jin Ho's chest, trying to rouse him. Another hunter nearby commented that Jin Ho was surprisingly resilient, possibly even a tank type. If it had been an ordinary person in his place, they would have been dead by now. Huang Dong-su couldn't fathom how this stubborn kid refused to speak. His bravery was commendable, but his recklessness was unforgivable. Huang slammed Jin Ho's head against the metal surface and threatened that he wasn't going to kill him just yet, since the nearby healer could pull him back even if he was close to death. "You'll suffer terrible pain until you tell me the truth," Huang vowed, adding that the place had been abandoned for 5 years. "No one will come to help you," he sneered. Jin Ho defiantly told him to go to hell, and Huang struck him harder. The hunters nearby urged caution, warning Huang that getting involved in a murder for money could have serious consequences. "We've already learned enough. Leave him," one of them said. But Huang glared at him and replied, "What are you talking about? We've only just begun." Suddenly, the hunters noticed an orc standing in the shadows, staring at them. Huang couldn't understand where it had come from, suspecting there had been a dungeon break nearby. As he approached, the orc seemed to recoil in fear.
When one of the hunters swung at the shadow orc soldier, Jin Woo's voice rang out, "Exchange." Jin Woo arrived on the scene and delivered a crushing blow to Huang Dong-su, sending him sprawling. Huang was bleeding and retreated, dazed and defeated, and with that, the episode ends.